Good evening and welcome back. Today, we trace the origins of one of the most enduring legends in human history, the legend of the dragon. Why do cultures across the globe tell stories of massive, scaled creatures breathing flame or controlling the waters? Where did these ideas come from? And why do they appear in places as far apart as China, Europe, and the Americas? We will examine some of the earliest dragon myths from China to Europe and beyond, and see how each culture gave this creature its own unique form. Some saw dragons as wise protectors, others as destructive and terrifying monsters. Nonetheless, the image of the dragon has endured for thousands of years and remains with us to this day. As always, I would be very interested to know from which part of the world you are listening and what time it is where you are. Whether you are settling in for the night or are simply curious about where these legends came from, I am glad you are here. So, let us begin. If we go back to the very first written stories, the world begins with storm and struggle. The enemy here is neither a king nor a neighbor. It is a serpent the size of the sea. The first scribes of Mesopotamia captured this on clay. They called the primordial waters Tiamat, the mother of the gods, who took the form of a massive sea monster. In the Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish, the young god Marduk faces Tiamat in a trial before all the gods. He raises a net to snare her and summons the winds until the seas part. When she opens her maw to swallow him, the winds rush inside and hold her jaws wide open. He releases an arrow that pierces her heart. After the battle, he does something that tells us how ancient people imagined order and chaos. He cuts her in half. From one half, he creates the vault of heaven. From the other, the earth. Rivers gush from her eyes, those great channels that will irrigate the land. The body of the chaos serpent becomes the map of the inhabited world. Creation is not a gentle bluing. It is the taming of a monster. This worldview permeates the ancient cultures of the Near East. The Hittites spoke of a storm god who battles a serpent named Iluyanka. In one version, the serpent steals the eyes and heart of the storm god, which is a powerful ancient image of a world without sight and courage. Through trickery and a feast prepared by a goddess, the serpent is bound with a rope and killed, and the god receives back what was taken. In another narrative, the god wins by marrying his son into the house of the serpent, and then forces a final duel, in which the son must perish along with the monster. These are not merely adventure tales. They are parables about what order costs, and how far a divine king might go to restore balance. Along the coast of the Levant, on tablets from Ugarit, the storm lord Baal battles a seven-headed sea serpent named Lotan. The text calls him the fleeing serpent and the twisting serpent. These words would echo centuries later in the Hebrew scriptures, where Leviathan appears as a sea dragon whom the Lord crushes and scatters. In the Psalms, you will read that the heads of sea monsters were crushed and the heads of Leviathan broken. In the book of Job, Leviathan appears as a beast of incredible scale. Smoke pours from his nostrils. Iron before him turns to straw. He laughs at the rattling of a spear. This language is poetry, but the point is clear. The world is full of forces that mock human power, and in the end, only a greater power can restrain them. Egypt turned this model into a daily ritual. Every night, the sun god sails along the dark river of the underworld, and every night, the serpent Apep rises. Priests wrote entire books of spells to bind him, cut him into pieces, and spit upon his name. The Book of Overthrowing Apep prescribes trampling, stabbing, and burning wax figures, so that the true serpent of darkness weakens and the dawn returns. Temple walls depict Mehun, the protective serpent, called around the solar bark to guard it during the hours when the sky is black. You can feel the rhythm of the Nile country in this liturgy. The flood comes and goes. The sun sets and rises. If the people do their part with ritual and word, the serpent will be restrained, and the seasons will be preserved. Not every serpent was an absolute enemy. The Mesopotamians carved a dragon named Mushkushu on the blue bricks of the Ishtar Gate in Babylon. It has the body of a snake, 4 lion paws, the hind talons of a bird, and a horned head. It stands as an emblem of Marduk and Nabu, a guardian on the threshold of the city. Here, the dragon is not a sea of chaos. It is a tamed power that now serves the city and its god. The difference matters. The same form can be a destroyer of worlds in one story and a protection against danger in another. What changes is not the scales or claws, but the place the creature occupies in the order of things. Persian tradition preserved a darker serpent. In the Avesta, the demon Azida is a three-headed dragon bringing drought, deceit, and ruin. Later poets call him Zahak and add that snakes grew from his shoulders when he fell under the kiss of a tempter. In the end, he is left chained to a mountain to wait for the end of time. This image of the chained dragon is related to other images of binding in this region. Bind the serpent and the world can breathe freely. Leave it at liberty and the wells will dry up. For a land that lives by rivers and seasonal rains, the metaphor needs no long explanation. This whole family of stories carries a single form in its heart. The serpent or sea dragon personifies a primal power that overcomes and destroys. This could be a flood or a drought, a plague or an eclipse, an invasion or civil collapse. Ancient storytellers do not point to a weather map. They summon a creature to the imagination. When the waters rage at the wrong time, the serpent is in convulsions. When the river overflows on schedule and covers the fields with black silt, the serpent has been pacified. The language is mythical, but the stakes are practical. People wanted to live, to sow, and to see their children grow. For this to happen, someone had to confront the monster. You can also see how these myths taught people to think about kingship. A good king is a conqueror or tamer of serpents. He's the one who cuts the knot of chaos and makes the channels flow. The liturgy in Egypt, trampling wax images of Apep, confirms the power of the pharaoh and the priestly class. The Enuma Elish ends with the gods granting Marduk 50 names and the right to rule. Even the protective dragon on the gates of Babylon tells every traveler that this city has brought nature under its heel. In the cause of every serpent, politics is hidden. Art secures the memory. Cylinder seals depict long-bodied creatures called around sanctuaries and gods. Reliefs paint the dragon of Babylon with a forked tongue and a ribbed back. In tombs along the Nile, you will find the solar serpent and the snake threatening the night bark. These are not quaint decorations. They are arguments laid out in clay and stone. The world will stand because the serpent has a place, and that place is either chains or sacred service. The story repeats every time a farmer cuts a straight furrow in a field that floods and dries exactly on time. What gave rise to such wide agreement that it is specifically the serpent that is the face of chaos? Part of the answer lies in simple experience. Large snakes frighten even those people who live alongside them. Crocodiles in African and Middle Eastern rivers look like dragons when they emerge from the murky water. During a storm, the sea itself writhes and coils. The line of a great wave is a moving spine. The air hisses before a squall breaks. For a people who live by rivers and shores and measure life by flood seasons, a scientist is not needed to tell them what a monster looks like. Nature shows them its profile every year. There is also the long memory of bones. Across Asia, people dug up massive fossils and called them dragon bones. In later centuries, apothecaries would grind such bones into powder for medicine. Long before that, jaws full of teeth or a rib cage from a strange cliff were sufficient confirmation of the old stories. You do not need to know what a dinosaur is to feel that something non-human once swam or stepped here. The mind fills in the scales and smoke. The serpent's tail grows another coil. If we step back and look at the first civilizations, the model persists with small local variations. Mesopotamia presents the creation of the world as a battle with a dragon and hangs the sky on its bones. Egypt ritualizes a nightly duel to guarantee the dawn. Anatolia tells of a storm god who has to win back his heart and eyes from a serpent. Canaan pits a seven-headed serpent against the rain god. Israel adopts this language and makes the victory the domain of the Lord alone. Persia turns the dragon into a bringer of plague, who must be bound until the last day of time. In each case, The serpent is an image of what must be curbed for life to continue, be it flood, drought, darkness, or the arrogance of a bad ruler. That is why the chaos serpent stands at the beginning of our dragon story. Before the webbed wings and the horde appear, before the night and the spear come, there is a river god with a net, a priest with a flint knife, and a king promising to hold back the darkness. The dragon is, above all, a form for a world problem: how to turn danger into order, how to make the days follow one another in succession. The answer the ancients gave was harsh. One must find the serpent and either force it to serve or put it to the sword. The oldest storytellers did not leave the serpent alone in the dark. They pitted a figure against it and gave that figure a name, a weapon, and a reason to fight. The appearance changes in every land, but the skeleton of the plot remains the same. The world is not in order. Water is withheld or floods rage without end. People cannot sow. The city is under threat. A god or hero steps forward and meets face to face with a creature that has called itself around. What everyone needs. This battle is not a sport. It is a struggle for a livable world. In the hymns of the Rig Veda, the storm god Indra earns his place by slaying a dragon named Vritra. Vritra withholds the waters, and the earth dries and cracks. Indra drinks the sacred brew that gives courage, raises his thunderous mace, and strikes. The hymns love precise imagery. They say that when Indra struck, the mountains split, the cattle scattered to freedom, and 7 rivers gushed along their beds. This is a clear way to tell a river culture that the flood has arrived on time. Later poets add more details. They say the thunderous mace was forged by the master of the gods, and that a great sage gave his bones so the weapon might find power. The truth that matters is older than these additions. Storm, thunder, and rain, these are the tools that break the serpent of drought. The hero is a celestial figure returning water to the fields. On the Iranian plateau, you will find a kindred battle. Ancient scriptures tell of a hero named Thraitona, who defeats a multi-headed serpent named Azida Hoka. The dragon brings famine and lies, which are as deadly as empty wells. When Thraitona strikes, he liberates the land, and the people bless him as a restorer. In later tales, the serpent is chained to a mountain to wait there for the final day. This binding is important. Not every victory ends in a corpse. In many places, the proper ending is a chain. The monster must be kept where it cannot destroy the order of the seasons. Travel west, and you will hear the Storm King Bull clash with a sea serpent named Lotan on the coast of Canaan. Ancient tablets call Lotan the fleeing serpent and the twisting serpent, and they endow him with 7 heads. 7 is not just a number. It is a measure of abundance and a sign of absolute power. A god who cuts off 7 heads has not just won a duel. He has proven that he can curb chaos that is self-renewing. Later, the poets of Israel would remember this image when they sang of the Lord crushing the heads of Leviathan in the waters. The monster is a symbol of everything that rises against life. The god who rules the storm is the only one who can subdue it. Greece carries this story into a landscape of mountains and islands, and there, the dragon often guards a spring, a grove, or a treasure. Zeus, the king of the heavens, fights Typhon, a serpent whose heads spew fire and smoke. When Zeus hurls lightning, he buries the serpent underground, and some say the hot breath coming out of the mountain crevices is the body of Typhon, still stirring. Apollo kills Python at Delphi, so that his oracle can take root beside the sacred spring. Cadmus kills a serpent dedicated to Ars and sows its teeth, from which armed men leap out of the ground, a mythical way of saying that a city can grow from blood and courage. Heracles meets the Hydra in a foul marsh and learns that strength alone is not enough. Every time he cuts, the wound multiplies. Only when his companion cauterizes the next does the hero win. Greek tales are frank about the price of victory. They show the sweat, the fear, and the inventive trick that turns the tide of battle. The lesson is not only that the serpent can be defeated, it is that the serpent is cunning, and only a prepared mind will return alive. The Hittites in Anatolia, who lived between the steppe and the forest, tell of a storm god who first loses to a serpent named Luyanka. The serpent steals the god's eyes and heart on the advice of a goddess and a mortal hunter. The god returns what was taken and binds the serpent at a feast. He kills the monster but must sacrifice his own son, who entered the serpent's house through marriage. This is a harsh story, and it seems older than the triumphant hymns. It says two things at once. Order can be restored, but there is always a price to pay, and a serpent that won once can be defeated a second time if the god and the people set a trap and hold the rope together. Egypt maintains the rhythm of victory by the hours that strike every night. The crew of the solar bark clashes with the serpent Apep in the hours of darkness. Priests in temples far from the desert mouth of the river spit on wax figures, stab them, burn them, and grind their ashes to ensure the world opens to light again. Victory is ritual, and it is repeated. Truth be told, this is perhaps a more honest account. No single battle tames the world forever. Every season has its serpent. Every night has a black river. People toil and pray, and the story is told again, so that grain can be sown with a steady hand. You can see how the pieces fit together in these lands. The opponent is serpentine. Often it has many heads. It lives in the water or controls the water. It withholds what must flow. The champion is the bringer of the storm, or a figure borrowing the tools of the storm. He carries thunder, lightning, or a spear imitating both. He liberates the river, opens the spring, or clears the sky. The result is not only the death or captivity of the beast, it is the rebirth of the landscape. People do not welcome a trophy on the wall. They welcome the rain hitting the fields that have cracked. The old language of a scholar would call this a general model. Today, a simpler thought will do. Neighbors learn from neighbors, and tribes carry away their songs when they move. Long before ships sewed the edges of the Mediterranean to the Indus, people traded not only copper, tin, wool, and grain, they traded the names of gods and the forms of monsters. A good story travels faster than a caravan. Once you hear of a hero who frees water by piercing a serpent in a mountain pass, it is hard to forget it when you look at a river bursting from limestone gates after the rains. These battles are not only about weather and farming, they also teach what a leader should be. A god sitting on a throne is obliged to kill or bind a dragon. A human king claiming the god's favor must repeat this deed in just wars, fair laws, and the building of canals. In Mesopotamia, kings cut channels through the silt and called them gifts from Marduk. In Egypt, the pharaoh proved he held Apep in check by maintaining temples, watching the calendar, and caring for warehouses that could mitigate linears. The hero in the story is not a private adventurer. He is an image of good rule. If he fails, the serpent will not be the only winner. Hunger, banditry, and despair will also win. The battle also carries a smaller meaning that everyone can feel. The monster can mean illness, drought in the heart, the fear that wakes you in the pre-dawn hours. The hero can be a parent who refuses to give up, a wise woman who knows when to heat the iron, a group of neighbors who tie a rope around a problem and pull together. Myths survive not only because priests repeat them. They survive because the mind recognizes pieces of its own experience in ancient scenes. There is always a river that needs to be freed. There is always a wound that will not close until you find the right fire. The old world did not stop telling this story when cities fell and new languages came. In a Greek poem that school children still read today, Perseus flies to the shore and finds a king's daughter chained to a rock. While a sea monster rises from the depth, he uses a mirror shield to turn an even greater monster into stone and wins. In another tale, Jason lulls a serpent to sleep with a song, so that he and his crew can steal the golden fleece and find their way home. These are variations on an old motif. The serpent guards what is necessary. The hero finds the very tactic that will work. Sometimes it is a tempered blade. Sometimes it is a lullaby and a herbal decoction. If you look north, where soldiers grew among fjords and long winters, the model changes its mood, but not its essence. There, the serpent can be a world-encircling sea creature feared even by the gods. And the hero can be a fisherman god who pulls the line, so that the boat heels and the horizon slides. On another day, the serpent is a dwarf-turned-dragon who coils on a horde in the wasteland. The winner is a boy trained by a wandering smith, who lies in a trench and thrusts his sword upward. As the belly passes by, different climates, different character, but the same bones in the story. The monster sits on what the world needs, be it water, peace, or wealth accumulated by long labor. The hero pays in blood and pain to release it again. These tales were not told to children as fantasies before the lamp went out. They were told as proof and as a warning. Proof that forces that seem invincible can be curbed. A warning that nothing remains curbed without vigilance. The serpent does not die once and for all. It returns next season under a changed name. The dragon of drought returns as the dragon of flood. The beast at the spring becomes the beast in the sky when the plague is carried by a hot wind. The remedy is the same. A champion must stand up with a tool suitable for the trouble, with comrades who know their role, and with the patience to finish what was started. There is one more thing linking these stories. The hero very often does not win alone. Even when a god hurls lightning, someone forged it. Even when a champion swings a sword, someone holds a torch to cauterize a wound that will not close. A goddess gives advice. A priest keeps the night watch and speaks the words. A friend stands ready with fire. The monster is great, the answer is brotherhood. Perhaps that is why these tales are so dear to both villages and courts. They praise courage, but they also praise the chain of hands that makes courage effective. By the time writing spreads and empires rise, this model is already old. It will pass into saints on horses and knights in bright armor. It will permeate poems where dragons speak and songs where they burn. But in its first telling, it is the simplest human need set against the oldest of fears. Water must flow in its channels. The sun must rise. The seed must sprout. The serpent called down, these things must be met. The hero steps forward. Thunder rumbles. The order of the world returns for another season. If you start the story of dragons in China, you start before writing and before kings. In villages that polish jade and watch the sky waiting for rain, archaeologists, lifting the earth in the northeast, found small jade figures curved like the letter C, with heads raised and tails tucked. They are called pig dragons because their snout is rounded, but the curve and scales reveal something more ancient and strange in them. The people who carved them lived 5,000 years ago. They buried these figures with care. This says two things at once. The dragon was already sacred then, and it was already connected to the fate of the living and the dead. When Chinese writing first took shape on bones and bronze, the character for dragon repeats the same long body. Early scribes carved its coils beside the names of kings and counts of harvests, and sacrifices on the ritual vessels of the Shang and Zhou courts. You see masks and spirals that art historians argue over, and that farmers would recognize at first glance. The winding beast winds through the clouds. The body is serpentine. On its head are deer antlers, a beard frames the jaw. It has the claws of an eagle, the whiskers of a catfish, the scales of a carp. Later, scholars will list these features as a catalogue of powers. The effect is what matters. The dragon is an animal created from the strongest parts of other animals. It belongs to the river, the mountain, and the sky simultaneously. In Chinese thought, the dragon is primarily the lord of water. It rises with thunder. He coils in rings within a cloud. He lives in lakes and in the depths of the sea. Rains fall because the dragons move. A good year is a year when the dragons are content. From this simple truth grew an entire order of worship and governance. Every region honored a dragon king who kept the waters of a lake, river, or sea. Officials burned incense in his temple and prayed for rain when the fields cracked. Farmers carried images through the streets and beat drums shaped like thunder. When a drought dragged on, a local official would fast and sleep on a straw mat, then perform a rite at the water's edge. When storms battered the coast and fishermen went missing, women climbed the temple steps with lamps and petitions, asking the Dragon King to calm the sea. This was not a quirk on the margins of faith, it was the backbone of daily life in a land that rests on rice and river silt. The court in the capital laid claim to the dragon on a higher level. Emperors said their right to rule was granted by heaven. They called their power a mandate. To show this, they sat upon a dragon throne and wore a dragon robe embroidered with waves, mountains, and 9 writhing beasts climbing toward a flaming pearl. The pearl is a mystery that artists never cease to paint. Some say it is thunder. Some say it is the moon. Some say it is perfect wisdom. The essence remains unchanged. The dragon seeks it, and the emperor seeks it too, which signifies harmony between the ruler and heaven. Only the emperor could wear images of 5-clawed dragons. Princes and nobility had to make do with 4 or 3. The law was precise, and the message clear. The closer you stood to the Son of Heaven, the closer you stood to the dragon. You can walk through the old palace and read this claim in stone and tile. Walls in the Forbidden City are decorated with panels of 9 glazed dragons, each endowed with its own character. Bridges cross palace streams on the backs of stone turtles and carved pixie, sometimes called the Sons of the Dragon. A marble ramp rises to the great halls with more than 1,000 scales carved in relief. Even the rooflines bite the clouds, their ridged beasts in the shape of small dragons preventing the spirit of fire from landing. In this city, you live under the rule of dragons. They watch from columns. They entwine thrones and incense burners. The eye must understand without words. The emperor rules. If the dragons are nearby and content all is well. If flood or famine follow him year after year, it means the dragons are displeased and heaven has turned its face away. Myths weave into this public language. A very old legend tells how the Great saved the land from a flood that lasted years. He did not try to dam the waters, he studied the channels and cut new ones with the help of a turtle spirit and sometimes dragons who dragged the earth in their claws. The water receded, settlements and fields returned. A dynasty began. In another tradition, the Yellow Emperor takes the form of a dragon after death and ascends to heaven. This is not boasting of a scaled body, it is a way of saying that the spirit of the founder joins the realm of thunder and clouds. Other stories soften this majesty. A farmer named Dongfu learns the will of the dragons and tames them with an honest heart. A village turtle becomes a dragon when it grows old and wise. The lesson is constant. Dragons favor those who bring themselves into accord with the right order of things. Turn your gaze from the court to the stars, and the dragon rules there too. The azure dragon of the east stands among the 4 great guardians of heaven, alongside the white tiger of the west, the vermilion bird of the south, and the black tortoise of the north. The dragon presides over spring and the element of wood. When the first sprouts rise and the plows move, the dragon has awakened. Astronomers noted his form in a chain of constellations. Poets use this language effortlessly. The spring wind is the stirring of a dragon. A sudden storm on a warm day is a dragon turning in his sleep. The dragon passing through paintings and festivals is not a beast burning villages. It is the bringer of rain and luck. In paintings, he has no wings, yet he flies. Artists depict him on scrolls writhing among clouds, with an open mouth, fluttering whiskers, and eyes fixed on the pearl. One famous master painted 9 dragons in ink so lifelike that the paper seems crumpled under their weight. On blue and white porcelain, a pair of dragons chase each other through waves and spirals of clouds. Carvers place dragons on the heads of rafters and at the ends of bridges where water flows. When a master cast a bell for a temple, he often added a small dragon to the top so the sound would carry like a roar. On the streets and fields, the dragon is not only an image, it is a dance, a boat, and a song. During the first lunar month of the year, groups of men carry a long dragon made of silk and bamboo through alleys and squares. Lanterns burn in its belly. The head jerks and dives sharply. Drums rumble like thunder. Children scream and run, while old people watch with hands tucked into sleeves. This dance is a prayer to awaken the luck of the new year. In the 5th month, rowers lean forward in long, narrow boats with carved dragon heads and painted scales. Drums beat the time. Oars rise, flash, and bite into the water. The race honors the memory of a poet who drowned himself for the sake of honor. It also addresses the river gods in the old language of speed and rhythm. Bring rain in its season. Do not bring floods. The tradition is deep enough to have its own family of minor myths. People speak of the 9 sons of the dragon. Each son has his own habits. One likes to carry heavy loads and squats like a turtle under slabs and stelae. Another coils on the ridges of roofs and watches for fire. A third loves the sound of bells and serves as a handle or decoration for a bell. A fourth bears his fangs on sword guards and door knockers to frighten thieves. The lists vary by place and century, because the point was never a fixed registry. It was a craftsman's shorthand. If you carve this creature here, it means you are asking for such and such help. Even the old schools of philosophy found a place for the dragon. Scholars writing about nature in terms of the 5 phases of change place the dragon in the sphere of spring growth. Thinkers tracing the proper connections between ruler and subject use the dragon as a measure. A good ruler is like a dragon that keeps the clouds and rain under control. A bad ruler is like a dragon that thrashes its tail against a lake and sends a flash flood at night. Confucian teachers warned princes that they must earn their dragons. Taoist masters told stories of adepts who rode dragons in a storm when they lived long and easily, understanding the breath that moves the world. This image is so powerful that even foreigners adopted it when they needed a symbol of China. Travelers from the West, first seeing the emperor's robes and the palace walls, wrote of the land of dragons and of a throne that shone like a sky full of scaled beasts. The symbol migrated to flags, coins, and treaties. It became a political sign as much as a sacred one. In the late dynasty era, rebels sometimes chose another beast for their banners to challenge the old order of scales and clouds. When the empire fell and a republic arose, the dragons remained in festivals and crafts. Even after stepping off the flag, it is hard to uproot a root of such depth. If you place the Chinese dragon next to its Western cousin, the differences become striking, and they say much about the lands that birthed them. The Chinese dragon does not hoard gold. It does not kidnap maidens. It rarely breathes fire. It is long and wingless, yet it flies. It brings rain and commands rivers. It is a patron, an emblem, and an ancestor. People pray to it during droughts and thank it when the rice ripens. The emperor wears its image, claiming a union with heaven. A village stonemason carves it on a bridge, so the stream behaves. This is an entire society speaking with one image about water, power, and luck. One more thread completes the pattern. The dragon does not live alone. In art, it is neighbored by the phoenix, the bird of grace and renewal. Together they embody balanced rule. The dragon is for the emperor. The phoenix is for the empress. Palace builders installed them in pairs, so that visitors read the message without scrolls. Harmony above will bring harmony below. Rains in season, harvest in season, festivals in season. The ancient fear of flood and drought is still here, but it is tamed into a solemn procession and ornament. Therefore, when you ask why China held untold dragons so firmly and for so long, the answer clicks into place. The dragon stands at the intersection of heaven and earth. It links the weather in the sky with the grain in the granaries. It links the virtue of the ruler with the well-being of the fields. It carries the hopes of a farmer on a dry morning and the pride of a court, believing that heaven watches over them. And it is also beautiful, which means much more than books admit. A coiled body in the clouds, a mouth open toward a pearl, tense claws, soaring whiskers. This sight makes one believe that the world is ordered and alive. If the Chinese dragon is the giver of clouds and an emblem of power, then the dragons of the broader Asian world are a great family with many branches. They live in rivers, caves, and palaces at the bottom of the sea. Some teach and protect, others must be resisted with ritual or steel. They all hold water and luck in their coils. And the peoples who tilled the land under monsoons or fished in narrow straits learned to speak with them through offerings, songs, and sometimes the sword. Start with India, where serpentine beings called Nagos fill ancient texts and rural shrines. This word can mean a snake, a spirit, or a king of the depths. In the Mahabharata, The Naugatuck Shocker destroys a king with his venom, which triggers the building of a great fire altar intended to exterminate entire snake clans. In another story, the serpent carrier poisons a river until Krishna leaps into the water and dances on his many heads, driving him away so that cattle and children can drink again. A greater Naga named Shesha lies coiled beneath the worlds and serves as a bed for Vishnu. During the long sleep between acts of creation, poets call him Ananta, which means infinite, and endow him with 1,000 hoods that spread out like a living canopy. When the gods and Asuras churn the milky ocean to obtain the nectar of immortality, they use the serpent Vasuki as a rope, with the gods standing on one side and their rivals on the other. And the mountains rise and fall while the world shudders. These are not idle fictions. They have meaning for a land that sees great rivers born from the snows, and seeks a proper relationship with the waters that can bless or ruin. Nagas are not always enemies. In Bengal, people still honor Manasa, the goddess of snakes, who protects against bites and brings fertility to fields and families. In Buddhist tradition, the newly awakened Buddha sits in meditation while a storm gathers. The Naga king Mukalinda rises from the lake and spreads his many hoods to shelter him from the wind and rain. Later Buddhist stories tell of Naga kings who guard scriptures and relics in underwater palaces and bring them to light when a teacher proves worthy. Thus, the serpent here is not a dragon to be killed. He is a guardian of wisdom who decides for himself when to share it. From India, the serpent kings travel along with merchants, monks, and builders throughout the territory of the ancient Maylands. You can still run your hand over the body of a Naga carved in stone. Its 7 or 9 heads fan out at the end of roads leading to temple gates. In Angkor, the railings of the great avenues are entire serpents of stone, guarded by giants and gods who seem to churn them, as if the entire city were a model of the primordial sea. Khmer origin legends even tell of a marriage between an Indian wanderer and a Naga princess. From this union, the kingdom is born after the princess's father drinks the floodwaters, so that dry land may appear. This image shows how the region understood power. A legitimate king is one who can strike a compact with the forces of water. Follow the Mekong, and you will enter lands where the Naga is a neighbor. In Laos and Thailand, shrines to river serpents persist at bends and whirlpools. Boat races thunder across the brown water under the gaze of huge eyes painted on carved dragon bows. In the far northeast of Thailand, people watch the river at the end of the rainy season, waiting for red fireballs that rise from the surface at night. Villagers call them Naga fireballs and treat them as a sign that the river spirits have awakened. In many cities of the Chao Phraya Plain, temple gates rise like the fanged maws of Nogos, and stair balustrades stretch in coils, guarding the path. Monks teach that a Naga once took human form to ask for ordination, and this legend still influences practice. In some monasteries, a novice in his early days wears a robe with a serpent pattern to honor that guest from the depths. Turny Stand, the dragon becomes the ancestor of a people. Vietnam tells how the dragon Lord Lac Long Corn united with the immortal fairy Oka. She gave birth to 100 children. Half went with her to the mountains, half went with him to the coast. The country traces its origin to this parting. Later, dynasties chose the dragon for their capitals and inscribed this dream into the names of cities. Thang Long means rising dragon, the ancient name for Hanoi. On roof tiles and imperial seals, one can see a long-bodied dragon with a soft face, its jaws open toward a flaming pearl. Court ritual once strictly defined the right to wear or carve this dragon, just as in China, but village craft never abandoned it. The dragon there still serves as a way to speak of the rivers that overflow, and the fields that turn green. Sail through the island arcs to the south and you will find another branch of the serpentine race. On Java and Bali, the Nogos Brasuki and Antaboga appear in dances and carvings as creatures supporting the earth and coiling at the foot of sacred mountains. Temple stairs pass between the bodies of Nogos that rise on platforms with widespread hoods. In some places, the story of the first churning of the ocean is carved on walls and retold at festivals. to bring the proper rain. In the Philippines, Bokunawa is a sea serpent that rises to swallow the moon, explaining the eclipse in a way clear to coastal villages. When the shadow bites the celestial body, people beat pots and shout to drive the serpent away. On Borneo, the Dayaks carve a creature they call a so it wins like a serpent, bites like a dog, and guards the edges of shields. These island dragons belong to the water and the wood, and the boundary between them. Climb into the mountains and the dragon takes the form of thunder. Baton calls itself the land of the thunder dragon, and places a white-scaled beast on its flag in its claws. It clutches jewels symbolizing prosperity and speech. The national emblem and the great monasteries of the Drukpa school carry the same figure. Storms roll down from the high peaks, and the rumble following the lightning is considered the voice of the dragon. In Tibet, the dragon shares territory with snow lions and wind horses. Buddhist painting shows Nogos among the lower spirits. Dwelling beneath temple floors, they are guardians of water and treasures, who must be appeased with offerings, so that springs flow clear and timber remains strong. Korea blends courtly and village perspectives in the image of a dragon that grows through merit. Folklore tells of the Imugay, a huge serpent that yearns to become a true dragon. If it endures long years and catches a glowing pearl fallen from the heavens, it ascends into the clouds. The resulting creature is the Yong, lord of rain and river, similar to the Chinese Long, and it is often drawn clutching this pearl. The idea that patience and virtue can lift a being from one order to another is firmly held in the Korean mind. This manifests in village tales and in the high art of the Joseon dynasty planners, who situated royal halls near ponds spanned by bridges in the shape of dragon backs. Rules existed regarding the number of claws a royal dragon could have on a rope, and water rights existed designed to correct a year that began to dry. The court claimed the creature for the sake of dignity, and the farmers kept it for the sake of hope. Finally, you reach Japan, where the dragon sits beside the sea, the storm, and the mountain shrine. The word is Ryu or Tatsu, and outwardly the creature looks like a cousin of the Chinese dragon, but with its own local habits. It flies without wings. It brings rain when the rice needs it. It guards the springs on temple grounds and crouches in the form of a fountain spout, where the faithful wash their hands before approaching the deity. Old tales say that beneath the ocean, there is a palace where the sea god Ryujin keeps treasures and tied jewels that can summon the sea or send it away. A fisherman named Urashima Taro once visited this palace and married a princess there, only to discover that beneath the waves, time flows differently. When he returned to shore, the world had aged without him. Other stories put the dragon in the path of the hero. The storm-born god Susanoo meets an old couple and their daughter weeping by a river. An 8-headed serpent will devour the girl when it returns. Susanoo brews strong sake and feeds it to each head. When the monster falls asleep, the god cuts it into pieces and finds in its tail a great blade, which later becomes one of the 3 sacred treasures of the imperial regalia. The sword is called kusonogi. It is a familiar lesson told in a Japanese way: skill and planning, not just strength, win the battle. And from the remains of the serpent is born a gift that seals a dynasty. Buddhism tied these island and peninsula stories together. As monks traveled from India through Central Asia to China, Korea, and Japan, they carried with them the image of the Naga as protector and benefactor. Temple legends everywhere tell of serpents that guard shrines, bring rain when drought strikes hard, or demand that a monk make peace with a spring before building. If a great pagoda fell during an earthquake, chronicles might record that the Naga beneath it stirred and needed to be appeased. Sometimes this meant replacing foundation stones, sometimes a rite of song and light. Thus, practical engineering and myth met without embarrassment. The builder did what worked and offered thanks to the spirits that permitted it. If you step back, a common model emerges from these many local tales. The Asian dragon and Naga are tied to water, to the fertility of fields, to the rhythm of the year. They give a face to the monsoon and the river. They explain the spark running from cloud to peak and the hiss of a spring that never dries up. Courts made them signs of power, because a ruler in these lands was judged by his success in managing canals, dams, and granaries. Villages kept them as neighbors because a family's food and safety depended on proper rains. And a calm river, where the serpent threatens a saint or hierarchs, where the serpent protects a wise person learns to bring offerings and show restraint. You can still feel this in the fabric of daily life. A child runs beneath a paper dragon that twists and dives on New Year's in a Korean port, and learns that the sea can be a friend if honored. A boat crew rows in rhythm while a monk rings a bronze bell with a dragon handle, and prays for a safe race and a good season. A Balinese carver cuts scales into stone at the foot of stairs that villagers climb to leave fruit for the gods and ask that the fever recede. A Japanese visitor scoops water with a palm from a dragon fountain and rinses their mouth in the clear stream before tying a wish slip to a branch. These actions say the same thing without any books. We live alongside forces greater than ourselves. We can reconcile with them, but we must also be ready to stand our ground when they go wild. Taken together, these dragons across Asia seem like a single river with many bends. They do not hold gold. They do not sit in caves counting cups. They are not trophies to be displayed on a spear. They are neighbors and patrons, and sometimes judges. They make kings honest. They make builders careful. They make farmers humble. They make storytellers brave. The people who passed these legends to their children knew what they were doing. They were telling them how to live beside the life-giving water and how to meet those rare days when that same water rises like a serpent and takes what it wants. When Greek poets used the word drakon, they meant a huge serpent with a gaze that never sleeps. The root of this word speaks of a keen stare and watching. In story after story, these creatures are set to guard what matters. They coil beside springs that feed a city. They lie beneath trees bearing golden fruit. They watch over the fleece that kings dream of stealing. A hero who needs water, treasure, or a god's favor will have to face the guardian and either kill it or find a way to pass without a wound. Delphi is the most suitable place to start because myths put the serpent at the origin of this oracle. Before Apollo came, legends say that this place belonged to the earth herself. A huge serpent, Python, lived there and made the spring his own. When Apollo reached the valley, he released his arrows and slew the creature so his sanctuary could stand by clear water. In older tales, the god himself chooses the battle. In later ones he takes revenge because Python hunted his mother. Either way, a new order replaces the old. The god of prophecy builds his house where the earth spirit once breathed, and the dragon that guarded the place turns into a corpse. The name Pythia, given to the oracle, recalls the dead serpent and the decay of its body. Even victory retains a trace of what was taken. Journey to Thebes and you will meet another serpent whose death erects a city. Cadmus follows a cow to choose a site for a new home. He sends men to fetch water from a spring dedicated to ours. A serpent rises and kills them. Cadmus himself goes to the spring, engages in a struggle with the beast, and pierces its jaw with a spear. By Athena's command, he sows the serpent's teeth in the ground. Armed men spring up and fight each other until only 5 remain. These 5 help Cadmus build the walls and become the founders of noble houses. The story places the dragon at the very foundation of the city and makes its teeth the seed of the people. It also remembers the debt Cadmus must serve ours for many years to pay for the spilled blood. The slain serpent gives life, but a reckoning follows. At the swamps of Lerna, Heracles meets the Hydra on a day when strength alone will not save him. The creature lives in foul water and has many heads. When he cuts one off to grow back, he brought with him a nephew named Iolaus to drive the chariot. This small choice proves wise. Heracles holds a head high. He presses a torch to the bloody stump, and the neck is cauterized. They create a rhythm from this: hack, burn, and move on. The last head is immortal and must be crushed under a massive rock. Heracles dips his arrows in the poisonous blood and carries the lethal tips until the end of his days. Later, this venom will overtake him again through a shirt soaked in a centaur's eyes. The Hydra is more than just a beast on a hero's list. It is a lesson about a problem that proliferates if struck blindly, and about the price that remains after victory. Far to the west, in a grove, grow trees with golden apples. The Hesperides tend to them, and Ladon calls around the trunks as their guardian. No thief shall pass while the serpent is awake. Heracles needs the apples for one of his labors. Stories diverge on what he does. In one, he kills Ladon and takes what he came for. In another, he tricks Atlas into plucking the fruit and then finds a way to make the old Titan lift the sky again while he slips away with the prize. Both versions preserve the same truth. The dragon guards a treasure that sparkles like the sun, and the hero must weigh risk against cunning to obtain it. Artists love this scene, as do the vase masters. The long body wins among the branches, while the shining apples hang within reach and yet beyond it. Beyond the Black Sea, another sleepless dragon lies in the grove of Ars in Colchis. The golden fleece hangs there, bright as dawn, a memory of the flying ram that once saved a prince. Jason and the Argonauts reach the shore and face a task that cannot be solved by force. The serpent never closes its eyes. Medea, knowing herbs and words that tame, softens the creature with potions and song. It weakens. The hero takes the fleece from the branch and runs. Here the dragon is not killed. It is overcome by a skill that the men around Jason do not understand and which he will later betray. The story preserves the thought that the dragon is a guardian who can be lulled, just as well as killed, and that the one who calms it often pays a price when the ship turns for home. Greek myths do not keep their dragons only in caves. Sea monsters rise when a city has angered a god, or when a king has boasted beyond measure. The old word for such a beast is ketos. When the coast of Ethiopia is cursed, Andromeda is chained to a rock as food for a creature from the depths. Perseus flies over the water with the head of Medusa in a bag, takes it out, and turns the monster to stone. In another tale, a sea beast is sent against Troy due to an insult. The city is saved when Heracles tears a king's daughter, named Hesione, from its jaws. These are not quite the same guardians of treasures in groves and at springs, but they are close relatives. They belong to the power imposed by the sea and its gods. Offend them and the serpent will rise. Appease them and the shore is safe again. A huge serpent also stands at the edge of the Greek world in the stories of Typhon. He is not a dragon of a spring or a tree. He is a power rising against heaven itself. Later poets describe him with 100 heads that blaze and roar. Zeus meets him with lightning and casts him down. Some say he lies beneath Mount Etna, and the fire coming from that mountain is his breath. The tale is majestic and harsh. It speaks to a people living beside volcanoes and earthquakes, telling them that the world is held in place by a victory that is never completely silent. The earth can still shudder when an old enemy tosses in his sleep. In the oldest Greek poems, the word drakon often means a snake, not a winged monster. The poets of the Iliad read omens in serpents appearing on the march. A snake devours birds in a tree before the eyes of the army, and a seer explains this count as the number of years the war will last. Shields bear images of snakes, coiled and ready to strike. A city wall might be called the back of a dragon. The line between animal and legend remains thin. Nevertheless, the habits we now attribute to dragons are all here if you look closely. Watchfulness, venom, multi-headedness, a connection to water, the duty to guard sacred places and precious things. The later era, which will paint wings and flame, works with clay that has already been fired. Rome does not invent many of its own dragon stories, but it preserves the Greek ones and adds the authority of soldiers and naturalists, who love to record wonders. Latin authors use the word Draco for the great serpents in Africa and India. Pliny the Elder says a dragon will try to crush an elephant by coiling around it, and that both beasts may perish in this struggle. He also says that in India, a serpent can be huge enough to stop a river when it drinks. The figures are fantastic, but the habit is clear. The Romans treated these creatures as parts of a distant natural world, dangerous, but real enough to make it into a scientific book. There is a fragment of Roman warfare that keeps a dragon at its heart and gives it a sound. When Roman legions fought the Dacians on the Danube, they encountered warriors carrying a standard in the shape of a dragon. A metal head with an open mouth swallowed the wind. A long textile body flowed behind, like a living tail. When the cavalry charged with the Draco held high, the wind made it billow and sink. The Romans liked what they saw and adopted this standard for their own units, especially for the mounted troops. Later emperors minted coins depicting soldiers carrying the Draco, and law codes spoke of units called draconari. In late Roman art, one can still find this dragon wind vane on the field, a sign of movement and fear sewn into fabric. It is not the beast at the spring, but it is a similar guardian, a marker of where the cohort stands on the field, and a mouth that screams without a throat. Roman storytellers also preserved the sea's right to wonders. Virgil inserts a warning into the story of the fall of Troy, when two huge snakes swim from the waves and crush the priest Laocoon and his sons. He had cautioned his compatriots against the wooden horse. The gods favoring the Greeks send a sign that terrifies the Trojans and makes them drag the horse into their walls. The scene is famous because a sculptor later carved it in stone so vividly that you can see the tension in the bodies and the coils that squeeze them. This is not a dragon in the later style. It is a serpent of the sea, summoned to fulfill a god's will, exactly what the Greek and Roman mind expected from such creatures. Greek myths live in paintings as much as in lines of verse, and these paintings fix how later centuries imagine dragons. On a black figure vase, Apollo stands over a long serpent writhing beside a small shrine. On a red figure crater, Heracles struggles with a multi-headed snake while his friend leans in with a torch. On a painted bowl, you can see Jason being vomited out of the mouth of the Colchian serpent after he took the fleece, a witty scene explaining how he escaped. Sculptors in later centuries place a dragon at a hero's feet as a trophy confirming the tale. The forms repeat: long bodies, crested heads, eyes that never close, claws around trunks and springs. If you trace the pattern in these Greek and Roman tales, several rules stand out. The dragon is most often a guardian. It watches over a place or thing that is sacred or rare. It belongs to the old order of a locale and must be removed or propitiated if a new order is to be established. It is linked to water and earth more than to air. It stings and chokes rather than burns. It can be lulled by song and herbs when iron is powerless. It remains faithful to gods who value watchfulness. The hero meeting it must bring cunning as well as courage. A city rising after a battle often bears some mark of the dragon in its bones, be it a spring that citizens never take for granted or a family claiming descent from teeth sown long ago. The Romans leave us another legacy that matters for the future of dragons in the West. By taking the Draco standard into their army and recording details, as if giant snakes were simply part of the world, they keep the creature within the bounds of the plausible. When later centuries read Latin texts and look at imperial reliefs, they do not see dragons as a pure dream. They see a sign that something like a dragon could have existed on the outskirts of the empire. This belief will not fade in the early medieval centuries. It will pass into bestiaries, listing the animals of creation, and into the sermons of saints. Speaking of serpents as images of sin, as well as beasts living in a neighboring valley, the classical world bequeaths both the stories and the sense that dragons have a place on maps. So, the Greek and Roman chapters assign the dragon a place where the city drinks, where the hero proves his valor, and where the army rides. This creature is a guardian and a test. It can perish or be lulled. It can be turned into a banner. It can also be buried beneath a god's thunder, and it will rumble from time to time, reminding people that victory is never the end. From here, the tale of the legend will stretch north to colder lands, where the serpent will gain wings and a hoard, and where its shadow will fall on long halls and burial mounds. Leave the sun-drenched sea of the Greeks and head for the colder waters where nights are long, and trees grow under winter winds. In these parts, the serpent becomes larger and more patient. It calls around the roots of the world ash. It lies on mounds. In time, It learns to speak. It grows wings and flame. But above all, it learns to love gold. Not to spend it, but to enjoy its stillness, its weight. The way it shines in a dark hall when no one is near. Scandinavian poets place the serpent and the earth itself. They call him the Midgard serpent, German Gondor, the child of the trickster and the giantess. Cast into the sea by the god, he grows until he can bite his own tail. Men fishing from longships sometimes feel their minds shudder when they think of that coil in the depths. An old song tells how Thor sets out to sea with the giant Hymir. He cuts off the head of a huge ox for bait. He sails beyond the Skerries and casts a line as thick as a man's arm. The sea surges. The serpent rises. Thor stands in the boat and pulls so hard his feet break through the planks. He lifts his hammer, and the sky darkens. At the last moment, Hymir panics and cuts the line. The sea closes over the coils, and the boat limps home. This story is not only about strength, it is about the sense that the world hides something immense and coiled just beyond the horizon, and that a reckless hand might pull it up too early. Another great serpent is at the roots of the world tree. His name is Nidhogg. He gnaws at the lowest roots, where mist, frost, and the dead gather. A squirrel runs up and down the trunk, carrying insults between the eagle on the upper branches and the serpent at the base. Stags eat the bark. The dragon drinks where the rivers begin. This image is not just a map. It is a way of speaking about decay and renewal. The tree lives by absorbing water and sending up sap. It also lives by shedding leaves to fertilize its own soil. When the poets say the dragon gnaws the root, they mean that everything in existence has something at its base working toward destruction. If not watched from the broad frame of the cosmos, the tales narrow to a single mound and a single man. In the Volsunga saga, there is a grim story of gold and the changes it works in the heart. A dwarf named Andvari hoards treasure in a river and wears a ring that helps him hide. A god and his companions force him to give it all up as Weregild after a hunter kills an otter. That was not an otter at all. The dwarf warns that the ring and the hoard are cursed. The warning comes true. The treasure passes to a father named Hreidmar. His son Fafnir kills him for the gold and drags it away. He goes alone to the wasteland and lies upon it until the man becomes a dragon in both essence and form. He breathes poison. He watches without sleep. He needs no sunlight as long as the metal is near. Against him comes a youth named Sigurd, trained by the smith Regin, Fafnir's brother, who himself lusts for the gold. The plan is simple and thorough. Dig a pit where the dragon drags his belly to the waterhole. Line the trench with a good sword. Strike upward as the weight passes over you, and do not flinch. Sigurd does this under a sky as calm as an eye. The steel pierces the belly and comes back out. Blood floods the trench. The dragon speaks. Fafnir asks the youth his name and origin and tells him he has been set up. He warns him that the gold will bring death to every hand that tries to hold it. The youth answers with the common sense of the young. A man must die someday, so let him die with great deeds behind him. When it is all over, he tastes the dragon's blood. The birds begin to speak to him. They tell him that Regin is sharpening a blade to kill him while he sleeps. Sigurd rises, cuts off the smith's head, loads the gold onto the backs of horses, and rides away toward a long fate full of love and sorrow. The dragon fell. The curse did not. In later centuries, singers on another river would keep the same bones but change the names. They would sing of Siegfried, who kills the dragon, bathes in its blood, and becomes invulnerable to wounds, except for one small spot where a leaf fell and kept the skin soft. In the Old English poem Beowulf, the dragon appears at the end as the king's final test. Many years have passed since the hero sailed through winter seas to fight the shadow in the hole, and then the mother in the cave. He has ruled his people and grown old. In a mound on a headland lies an ancient hoard, sealed by the bones of the dead. In this hoard is a cup, and a thief's hand finds it in the darkness and carries it away. The dragon wakes, discovering the loss of a single item. He feels the empty space and rises in rage. He goes out at night and pours fire onto farms and roofs. Beowulf gathers men and goes to the mount. At the entrance, his chosen warriors stumble and freeze. One youth named Wiglaf is not afraid. He runs forward together with his lord. The dragon emerges from the entrance like a storm. Beowulf's shield melts. He strikes. The sword breaks. He is burned. Wiglaf thrusts his blade into the soft spot under the wing. The king finds a dagger and cuts the monster's throat. The flame dies. The cave echoes with the soft ring of piles of gold. Beowulf sits down, leaning against a stone. He asks to be shown the treasure and thanks God for winning it for his people. He gives his golden necklace to Wiglaf and speaks his last words. He dies there, the air smelling of smoke and the light of coins flickering on the wall. Men build a mound on a sea cliff and burn him on a pyre. They bury the treasure with him. A woman sings a funeral dirge that tells of coming wars and enemies across the sea. The poem says, "The dragon lay there dead by the stone wall. He who guarded the winter hoard without count." What remains with you is not only the battle, it is the feeling that gold kept in the darkness acquires a life of its own, and calls to something scaled and watchful. The mound becomes a kind of living wound on the earth. It draws men and misfortune. It demands that a king empty it and pay for the deed with his life. In the north, there are smaller worms, of the kind that crawl out of walls and into ballads. In England, people tell of the lantern worm. A young lord skips church to go fishing and pulls out a pale, eel-like creature with eyes he does not like. He throws it into a well and leaves to seek his fortune in far-off wars. While he is gone, the worm grows in the darkness and then crawls out. It coils around a hill. It eats cattle and knocks down stone walls with a flick of its tail. The lord returns home and seeks advice from a wise woman. He commissions armor studded with knives like thorns. He meets the worm in a river where the current will carry the pieces away. The monster coils tightly around him, cuts itself on the blades, and dies. There is a final twist that gives the story bitterness. He promised to kill the first living creature he saw after the battle to lift a curse. He cannot do it. From that day, his house falls into decline, and his lineage bears the burden of his choice. Across the border, in the northern lands, lives the lantern worm. It dwells in a cave and ravages the fields until a knight named Somerville stands against it. He forges a spear with a wide iron tip and wraps it in pitch and hemp. He sets the wrapping on fire and drives the fire into the open moor until the cave fills with smoke, and the worm bursts. Far off in the islands, there is the tale of the great storeworm, which coils in the sea and demands a princess every week. A young man whom no one took seriously steals a boat, sails into the open moor, and cuts out the liver. He sets it on fire with a coal brought from home. The beast tosses in convulsions and dies. The teeth fall into the sea and become the Orkney and Shetland Islands. In these tales, there is the taste of peat, smoke, and tide. They teach that a monster can swallow the shore, and that wit and grit can light a fire in its belly. You can see the dragon in wood and stone as well as in songs. Carvers in Norway built churches where the ridge beams end in dragon heads, biting the air above the eaves. The old timbers of stave churches are decorated with interlaced creatures' slender bodies with claws, and long necks that tie in knots around each other. This style consists of curves and bites, as if the walls remember that the world serpent lies beneath every village. On runestones, the ribbons on which the words are inscribed are often the bodies of serpents, writhing as the letters follow the back. The inscription itself becomes a dragon that can be traced with a finger. Ships bear the same mark. Long ships plough narrow fjords with a head on the prow that glares fiercely at foreign shores. Old laws in Iceland states that you must remove the dragon head before docking, so as not to frighten the land spirits living there. This is a good window into the northern mind. The head is a weapon of fear in war, but it is also a thing that can insult the powers of a locality if you bring it into a quiet bay. The people of these shores knew there are spirits that help if treated with respect. A wise captain removes the bared snout before setting a course for home. Gold lies beneath all these stories like embers under ash. The north is full of hoards left in bogs and buried in mounds. Some were offerings to the gods. Others were hidden in troubled times and never reclaimed. Still others were a lord's pride when later people dig bracelets, plaques, and cups from the black soil. They understand why stories of sleeping wellfellows, a mound with a ring of stones and a door facing the sea begs for a legend. It is not hard to believe that a scaled creature lies inside, eyes half closed and silently counting the prize. The poets turned this feeling into a rule. The dragon loves gold because gold asks no questions, does not switch sides, and gives no orders. It only shines. The dragon's love is the final step of greed that begins in human hands. The moral tone of dragon legends sharpens as you move toward the High Middle Ages. In the oldest Scandinavian songs, the dragon is a fact of the world. It is a danger you deal with using a spade and a sword. In the later English poem, the dragon became something more than just a beast. It is the price of kingship. It is the temptation to sit on wealth in a hall while the world outside burns. In ballads, the worm is sometimes a curse laid on a man who offended a witch or on a princess wronged by kin. An animal can be killed. A curse must be lifted. The dragon becomes a mirror held up to the heart. From these northern tales, the details are assembled that later writers fasten with iron nails. The dragon hiding in the earth and guarding a hoard. The dragon that flies and burns fields when a cup goes missing. The dragon that speaks and uses thought like a blade. A youth with a sharp sword and a spade. An old king with a broken sword. And one loyal young man beside him. A mound on a cliff against which the sea beats in winter. A ring that brings ruin to every hand that wears it. You feel how close this is to the earth. It belongs to people who buried their dead with things. Who knew what it was like to lose cattle to something that moved in the night. Who took gold as payment and saw what it did to friends. The North does not abandon the older meaning of the serpent either. Jormungandr waits in the sea until the last day, when he will come ashore to meet Thor. The god will kill him and take 9 steps before falling dead from the poison. Nidhogg will rise from the roots and fly over a field strewn with bodies. These are grim images, intended to remind people that even the most precise hammer blow is but a temporary delay before the turning of the wheel. And yet, it is the stories of a man, a mound, and a shining blade that take root in the human mind. These very legends lie at the heart of every later depiction of a dragon stretched over treasure, and the ancient habit of naming gold after the creatures that lay upon it. Poets speak of Fafnir's bed. They speak of the hoard's flame. They mean the gold, but they also mean its price. This is the face of the dragon that will step into the next era. It will meet saints on horseback and knights in chainmail. It will have wings more often. It will breathe fire. It will retain the old love for treasure and the old gift of vigilance. It will become a test of courage and a test of the soul. The path from a god fighting a sea serpent to a soldier meeting a worm in a river is direct enough, if followed through the north. When the old gods faded and church bells began to toll the hours, the dragon did not vanish. It changed neighbors. It moved from springs and sacred groves to village squares and church walls. Priests preached about it. Artists placed it under the hooves of saints. Children on feast days watched performances where a scaled monster belched smoke, and a saintly rider pierced it with a spear. In this new world, the dragon was more than a creature. It was a lesson with claws. It personified pride, greed, and the dark breath that spreads fear like a disease. It also personified the old powers that, according to the church, had to bow before a higher authority. Most people begin with St. George, because his story took root from the eastern shores of the Mediterranean to the rainy fields of England. The old hagiographies say he was a warrior who died for his faith. Later storytellers gave him a horse, a spear, and a city in distress. In the Golden Legend, a book of saints' lives that spread in the 13th century, the action takes place near a city called Selene. A dragon had seized a marsh and poisoned the water. The people bought peace with sheep. When the flocks ran out, they began to tie children to stakes on the shore. Finally, the lot fell to the king's daughter. She stands by the water in a ceremonial gown, while the city weeps behind closed doors. George bursts into the story as if from the gates of heaven. He makes the sign of the cross. He charges with his spear and strikes a precise blow. The wounded monster writhes in agony. He tells the princess to throw her girdle over the beast. She ties it around the dragon's neck, and it follows her through the gates like a submissive dog. The people rejoice. The saint tells them the city must turn to God. They do so. Only then does he kill the dragon cleanly and calmly. In this version, the battle is not just a fight between a knight and a beast. It is a sign that faith tames terror and liberates the souls for everyone. The name and banner of George traveled with the Crusaders. In the East, he was already a saintly warrior. On the long road and under foreign skies, people liked the thought that he rode beside them. By the time English kings began to gather troops under the Red Cross on a white background, George had become a kind of patron of courage. His feast day in England was celebrated by royal decree in the 13th century. Guilds took him under their protection. Artists in icons and frescoes gave him a beautiful horse and a calm face, placing the dragon at the tip of his spear. One can stand before an Italian painting and see the moment the spear slides through the ribs. The princess holds the leash. In the distance, the city wall towers. A small crowd looks out from a tower. It is both theatre and theology. There are other saints in whose stories dragons appear in a different light. St. Margaret of Antioch is remembered as a girl who did not renounce her faith. Her jailers tortured her. According to legend, a dragon appeared in her cell and swallowed her whole. She began to pray and held up a small wooden cross. The cross tore open the monster's belly from within, and she emerged alive. As a sign of this, the legend taught women to call upon her in childbirth and danger. It also gave stone carvers a fierce subject for tympanums and farts. A small girl calmly emerging from a mangled serpent, the cross still shining in her hands. In France, people told how St. Martha met a creature called the Terrorist on the banks of the Rhone. Fishermen cursed it for tearing nets and sinking boats. Soldiers could not kill it. Martha sprinkled the beast with holy water and sang a song. The Terrorist became tame and allowed her to lead it into the city on a simple cord. The people gathered and, in fear, beat it to death. The creature died. The townspeople felt the weight of this act and begged the saint to forgive them. To this day, in Tarascon, a summer festival is held with a huge wooden beast on wheels and a group of drummers, who lead it through the streets. It is a memory of a dragon fallen by a hymn rather than a blade. On the Seine, another bishop left his mark on the memory of the marshes. The inhabitants of Rouen told of a creature named the gargoyle that lurked by the river, crushing boats and belching smoke that blackened the air. Saint Romain met it with prayer and the help of a volunteer from the city. He threw his stole over the beast's neck and led it back like a bridled horse. The townspeople burned the monster, but kept its head as a warning and a charm. Stonemasons took up the name and installed gargoyles on the edges of cathedral roofs. During rain, water pours from their moors so the walls stay dry. The dragon, once breathing foul air, now spits clean water away from carved saints. It is a small victory captured in stone and mortar. Across the sea, in the old Celtic lands, saints and dragons carry on a quieter dialogue. A Breton legend says that Saint Carental came to a village by an estuary and found a dragon terrifying cattle by the river. He placed his altar stone on the ground and served mass. When he finished, he lifted the stone as if it weighed nothing and walked to the water. He held out his stole as a leash. The dragon bowed its head and followed him. The king of that land promised a place for a church and kept his word. In such stories, the saint does not fight. He orders the world, and the beast takes its place. Faith is shown as a law that prevents the river and the pasture from swallowing each other. Archangel Michael towers over them all as the church's greatest dragon's lair. The book of Revelation shows him fighting the ancient serpent and casting him down. Artists gave him a shield and spear and placed the scaled body beneath his feet. In some works, he weighs souls on a scale, while a dragon tries to cheat the balance with its claw. The message is clear. Evil shall not triumph, as long as the captain of heaven keeps watch. Shrines on lonely mountain peaks bear his name. Pilgrims climb steps in sea mist or thin air and kneel at altars, looking out at the borders of earth and clouds. The dragon is sometimes only a coil of carving at his ankle, but everyone knows what it means. Men and women in those centuries did not classify dragons among harmless fantasies like unicorns. Bestiaries listed dragons among the largest serpents. Isidore of Seville wrote that the dragon loves caves and flees from the scent of rubbed laurel. Travelers returned with crocodile skins and hung them over church doors as trophies of dragons killed in Egypt or the Levant. Whales washed ashore left ribs and jaws that could be installed as markers of monsters from the deep. Apothecaries sold Glossopatre fossil shark teeth under the name dragon tongues. People ground them and wore them as a remedy for poison. Scientists now smile at this. A farmer in a coastal parish, seeing a black tide in the reeds, did not smile. He passed the church porch, saw a huge jaw hanging high, and felt calmer. Sermons used a dragon to show the face of sin. Quarrels were pride and envy. Breath was slander and plague. The hoard in a cave was wealth a rich man withheld from the poor while the village starved. In a stained glass window, you might find a dragon at the base of a well. Above it, a saint raises two fingers in blessing, and a clean stream flows into a bucket. This scene is a schematic for an entire way of life. If a well is to give sweet water, someone must stand between the community and what defiles it. That someone is the priest, the saint, the just ruler, or the neighbor who refuses to be afraid. The church theatre took up this teaching and gave it a voice. On St. George's Day, in some towns, they staged a play where a dragon made of canvas and ash sticks wove through the crowd. Inside sat a man pulling a cord to make the jaws work. Boys ran in fear and delight. A girl in white walked beside it with a ribbon for a leash. When the spear hit the mark, the dragon belched smoke. Drummers clapped their hands, letting out a roar. Afterward, the procession headed to the church for a blessing and to the fair. This was not a mockery of faith. It was a faith into which everyone could enter with laughter, both the brave and the timid. In cathedral sculpture, the same idea was majestic. Tympanums above doors showed saints standing calmly, while a dragon crawled at their hem. Column capitals were entwined with scaled bodies that braided with vines and leaves into neat knots. Pulpits were decorated with carvings of George or Michael, so that every sermon issued from a foundation that was itself a silent lesson in courage. A man who did not know a single letter could read this. There were also quieter applications. When the plague arrived and the bells rang without cease, processions with relics and candles stretched through the streets. In some cities, figures of dragons were set on wagons and wheeled out through the gates into the fields, as if seeking to banish the contagion from beyond the walls. The language here is old, older than the altar and the tower. But the church did not despise it. A priest who buried a dozen people in a week used any means to strengthen hearts. If parading a wooden serpent passed a well-brought silence for one night, and courage for one morning, it was a good work. In this medieval world, the dragon maintained two faces. One was the beast in the marsh on the edge of town. The other was the devil in a sermon. Often, they were one and the same. The constant note in many lives was not terror of the monster, but fear that the season or the disease would break them. Legends of saints and dragons acknowledge this fear. They answer it with the image of a person who stands between the horror and the people, and does not run. Sometimes this person fights. Sometimes he speaks, and the beast obeys. Sometimes he bandages a wound or blesses a well. The form of the story matches the form of the church year. The transition from the ancient dragon to the medieval one is not a rupture. The creature still guards the water. It still lies beside treasures and roads. It still troubles ships. What is new is the conviction that the right word and the right sign can curb it. Where ancient heroes carried thunders, saints carry rights and patience. Where ancient kings sowed teeth to build a city, bishops install fonts and altars and teach people fortitude. The dragon is forced to serve as a teacher of both danger and hope. By the height of this era, The dragon was everywhere you looked. It spat rain from a gargoyle's mouth. It called on a bestiary page next to a note warning of its gaze. It lay beneath Michael's feet on the altar screen. It beat a drum in a May performance and made children shriek. It hung from a church beam in the form of a crocodile from distant lands. It lurked in the mouth of a cave behind the village in a story told at night. When the wind moaned in the branches, the creature became a common language. When people said dragon, they meant a danger faced together and a victory depending on courage and grace. All this prepared the ground for the next kind of tales. It wasn't just priests standing between the village and the beast. Knights and common folk stepped forward with iron and knack. Their stories are harsher and grittier. They appeal to the hunger and fear in the body as much as in the soul. They also shape the dragon in a new way, with wings, fire, and a love of gold that burns the heart of the one who craves it. Once the saints showed that prayer could subdue a monster, the lay world responded with iron and skill. These are stories of towns waking up to smoke and the clatter of hooves, of notices nailed to the church door asking for any man with a steady hand, of forges ringing at midnight while smith and squire test a blade against a block of seasoned oak. The dragon in this world is not always a symbol of sin. It is also a creature that eats sheep, drinks from the mill pond, and frightens children in an alley. Knights take to the road with spear, mail, and a plan. And it is the plan that often decides the matter. English ballads keep a whole shelf of such battles. They love to name the hill, the stream, and the gate so that anyone living nearby can point to the spot where the first cry rang out. The tale of the lantern worm begins with a carefree boy, and a Sunday he decided to skip. He fishes by the weir and pulls out a slippery thing like a huge eel. He coils it around his arm, shudders at the look it gives back, and hurls it into a well. He goes overseas to win fame. Years pass. The creature in the darkness learns to climb. It grows, leaves the well, and wraps its body around a hill like a belt. It takes livestock from farmers and smashes stone cottages to splinters with a flick of its tail. When the prodigal son returns home, he finds a land that whispers his name paired with the name of the worm. He goes to an old woman for advice. She tells him to meet the creature in the river and to make armor studded with blades. He does as told. The worm approaches, calls to crush, and cuts itself on every iron spike. The river turns red and carries the pieces away. The youth gave a stern vow as part of the deal. He did not keep it. The song says his house paid for this failure with grief and lean years. The lesson is given twice. You can kill a monster with foresight, but you cannot leave an old debt unpaid. Nearby, the lantern worm gnawed its way into memory. It lay in a cave and came out to take cattle and frighten travelers on the road between farm and church. A border man by the name of Somerville commissioned a wide forged spearhead, wrapped it in pitch and tow, and set it on fire. He waited by the hole and drove the burning iron into the open moor. Smoke and stench floated over the waste. The worm burst. The story is told in a few strokes, because people in that country knew what a quick kill looked like, and why a bit of pitch and patience could do what a dozen swords could not. The dragon of Wantley is of a different sort. It comes down from the ridge and levels stone walls just to hear them fall. It swallows a child on the way for water and drinks the whole mill pond for its own pleasure. The hero of this ballad is no saint. It is more of Moor Hall, a down-to-earth man who drinks a lot, kisses the widow, and cracks jokes coarse enough to make the parson cough. He has a set of armor with spikes so thick, he looks like a walking hedgehog. And he meets the dragon in a hollow where the soil is soft. He wrestles and rolls, gets under the belly where the scales are thin, and then performs the act the minstrels love to sing about. He kicks the beast in the only tender spot it has left. Satire strikes with a hoof. The ballad is a broad grin, but it hides a harsh truth. Sometimes the monster is a greedy neighbor with a title and a sharp quill, and sometimes the only answer is to sew a suit fit for a scrap, and know no shame in the process. There are gentler, sadder rural tales. In Hereford, the Mordiford dragon crawled out of the thicket and made a lair in a bend of the River Lug. A girl named Maud found the creature when it was small and fed it milk. It grew huge and tame only for her. It took sheep, then cattle, and finally people. When the folk could no longer bear it, archers and pikemen lured it into a field where wagons formed a wedge. They braced their shafts and stood firm. When it charged, the tips drove into its throat. The dragon died. The village buried it and named an oak after the girl who loved what could not love her back. Without bringing ruin, the story echoes the quiet pattern of a place that knows flood and famine. Pity sits beside duty, and both are heavy. The line between romance and local memory blurs when it comes to river cities. In Krakow, they still tell how the wall dragon lived in a cave under the castle hill and took cattle from the pastures along the Vistula. Nights came and failed. A cobbler's apprentice thought of another way. He stuffed a calf's skin with sulfur and pitch and left it at the cave entrance. The dragon swallowed the bait. Thirst gripped it like a fist. It ran to the river and drank until it burst. The people made a prayer and wrote the common man's name in their books. If you stand on those stones today, you can look up at the castle and down at a bronze dragon that breathes fire for children on a schedule. The old trick still warms the face. Songs of the French border and English romances involve knights in the same work, though they robe it in the silk of courts. Sir Bevis of Hampton is exiled from home and grows into a man abroad. He returns with a sword named Morglay and kills a dragon near Southampton that was burning peasants in their fields. Guy of Warwick repents of his pride, goes on a pilgrimage, and returns thin as a staff. He fights a dragon near Northumberland, a giant and a strange cow the size of a barn. The poems are grand in their claims and generous in geography. They invariably do one useful thing. They put a noble man on the road alone or with one friend and force him to answer for what his lands have suffered. A noble house is not a hedge against monsters. A noble house is a place from which a man leaves with a spear and a vow. In the East, Slavic songs take on a sharper sound. In the Byliners of Rus, the bogatyr Dobrynya Nikitic is warned by his mother never to bathe in a certain river, and never to step on a certain stone. He does both a way of saying a young warrior must test the law. The three-headed dragon's Migorinich bursts forth. They fight for 3 days. The hero stands in boiling streams. He drives the creature to the Puckay stone where roads meet and worlds touch. He cuts off 3 heads, then 3 more when the beast's wives fly out howling. In other tales, he frees a princess from the dragon's claws and makes an entire city breathe again. The battles are long and messy. They red like a winter that won't end until a man puts his whole body into fighting it. If you go west again to the Welsh Marches and look at the White Horse on the hills, there is a bald patch on a small hill that the folk call Dragon Hill. They say the ground there is bare because the dragon's blood spilled and nothing will grow where it's soaked in. The outlines of the story are as old as chalk. A knight with a red cross on white fights a serpent with long claws and a hiss that carries over the ridge. An observer could see the line of men on the hill and a banner fluttering in the wind. Whether the tale names George or some other rider, memory anchors the shining blade to a real hill and fixes the truth of the battle. The wound that saved the village can mark the earth forever. Behind the spectacle and sermon stands craft. These stories often pause to tell you what the fighter wore and why. A knight puts on a thick gambesson under his mail, so a blow won't break his ribs immediately. He carries a shield covered in rawhide, so it won't shatter instantly. He takes a long ash spear with an iron tip, so the shaft won't fly to splinters. When he braces it against the earth, if he has time, he digs a trench in the old way and lies in it point upward, the only honest chance for a man against weight with scales. If the dragon breathes flame in the tail, he soaks a cloak in water and throws it over his head like a hood at the moment of impact. If it spits poison, he fights downwind or with a handkerchief soaked in wine, which at least gives him heart. Pitch and tow go on spearheads because fire rushes forward faster than a man can step. Lime dust blinds, caltrops maim, bells frighten. Dogs tell the sentry where the thing passes at night in the reeds. The hero in the romance may ride into the picture with a clean sword. The village that raised him knows he also carried a bag of tricks. The battle patterns repeat. A spring is defiled and must be cleansed. A narrow bridge becomes a funnel, where a man can stand one against one. A blind alley is a trap. The mouth of a cave frames a head, so that a thrust has a chance to find the soft spot between plates. There is a stubborn belief in the belly strike. From Sigurd beneath Fafnir to the archer, who finds the soft underwing in Beowulf's mound. The stories insist that even a wall of scales has a seam. The seam exists to reward patience and grit. There were also quieter applications. When the plague arrived and the bells rang without cease, processions stretched through the streets with relics and candles. In some cities, they placed dragon figures on carts and wheeled them out through the gates into the fields, as if seeking to drive the contagion beyond the walls. The language here is old, older than the altar and the tower. But the church did not despise it. A priest who had buried a dozen people in a week used any means to strengthen hearts. If parading a wooden serpent past a well gave silence for one night and courage for one morning, it was a good deed. In this medieval world, the dragon maintained two faces. One was the beast in the marsh at the edge of town. The other was the devil in a sermon. Often, they were one and the same. The constant note in many lives was not terror of a monster, but the fear that the season or a disease would break them. Legends of saints and dragons acknowledge this fear. They answer it with the image of a person who stands between the terror and the people, and does not run. Sometimes this person fights. Sometimes he speaks, and the beast obeys. Sometimes he binds a wound or blesses a well. The form of the story matches the form of the church year. The transition from the ancient dragon to the medieval one is not a rupture. The creature still guards the water. It still lies beside treasures and roads. It still troubles ships. What is new is the conviction that the right word and the right sign can curb it. Where ancient heroes carried thunders, saints carry rights and patience. Where ancient kings sowed teeth to build a city, bishops install fonts and altars and teach people resilience. The dragon is forced to serve as a teacher of both danger and hope. By the height of this era, the dragon was everywhere you looked. He breathed rain from the mouth of a gargoyle. He coiled on a bestiary page, next to a note warning of his gaze. He lay beneath Michael's feet on the rood screen. He beat a drum in a May play and made children shriek. He hung from a church beam as a crocodile from distant lands. He lurked at the mouth of a cave behind the village in a story told at night. When the wind moaned in the branches, the creature became a shared language. When people said dragon, they meant danger faced together and victory depending on courage and grace. All this prepared the ground for the next kind of tales. It wasn't just priests standing between the village and the beast. Knights and common folk stepped forward with iron and knack. Their stories are harsher and cruder. They appeal to hunger and fear in the body as much as in the soul. They also shape the dragon anew, with wings, fire, and a love for gold that burns the heart of the one who craves it. Once the saints showed that prayer could subdue a monster, the lay world answered with iron and craftsmanship. These are stories of towns waking to smoke and the stomp of hooves, of notices nailed to the church door asking for any man with a steady hand, of forges ringing at midnight while the smith and squire test a blade on a block of seasoned oak. The dragon in this world is not always a symbol of sin. It is also a creature that eats sheep, drinks from the millpond, and scares children in the alley. Knights take to the road with spear, mail, and a plan. And it is the plan that often decides the matter. English ballads hold an entire shelf of such battles. They love to name the hill, the brook, and the gate, so that anyone living nearby could point to the spot where the first cry rang out. The tale of the lantern worm begins with a carefree boy, and a Sunday he decided to skip. He fishes at the weir and pulls out a slippery thing like a huge eel. He coils it around his arm, shudders at the look it casts back, and flings it into the well. He goes over the sea to find fame. Years pass. The creature in the darkness learns to climb. It grows, leaves the well, and winds its body around a hill like a belt. It takes cattle from farmers and smashes stone cottages to splinters with a flick of its tail. When the prodigal son returns home, He finds a land that whispers his name paired with the worms. He goes to an old woman for advice. She tells him to meet the thing in the river and make armor studded with blades. He does as told. The worm approaches, calls to crush, and cuts itself on every iron spike. The river turns red and carries the pieces away. The youth gave a harsh vow as part of the deal. He did not keep it. The song says his house paid for this failure with grief and leanness. The lesson is given twice. You can kill a monster with foresight, but you cannot leave an old debt unpaid. Nearby, the Linton worm gnawed its way into memory. It lay in a cave and came out to take cattle and scare travelers on the road between farm and church. A man of the border, named Somerville, commissioned a broad forged spearhead, wrapped it in pitch and tow, and set it on fire. He waited at the burrow and drove the burning iron into the open moor. Smoke and stench drifted over the waste. The worm burst. The story is told in a few strokes, because people in that country knew what a quick kill looked like, and why a little pitch and patience could do what a dozen swords could not. The dragon of Wantley is of a different sort. He comes down from the ridge and knocks over stone walls just to listen to them fall. He swallows a child on the way for water and drinks the entire millpond for his own pleasure. The hero of this ballad is no saint. It is more of Moor Hall. A grounded man who drinks much, kisses a widow, and cracks jokes coarse enough to make the parson cough. He has a set of armor with spikes so thick, he looks like a walking hedgehog. And he meets the dragon in a hollow where the soil is soft. He wrestles and rolls, gets under the belly where the scales are thin, and then performs an act the minstrels love to sing about. He kicks the beast in the only tender spot it has left. Satire strikes with a hoof. The ballad is a broad grin, but it hides a harsh truth. Sometimes the monster is a greedy neighbor with a title and a sharp quill, and sometimes the only answer is to sew a suit fit for a scrap, and know no shame in the process. There are gentler, sadder rural tales too. In Hereford, the Mordiford dragon crawled out of the thicket and made a lair in a bend of the River Lug. A girl named Maud found the creature when it was small and fed it milk. It grew huge and tame only for her. It took sheep, then cattle, and finally people. When the people could no longer endure, archers and pikemen lured it into a field where wagons formed a wedge. They set their shafts and stood firm. When it charged, the tips drove into its throat. The dragon died. The village buried it and named an oak after the girl who loved what could not love her back. Without bringing ruin, the story echoes the quiet way of a place that knows flood and famine. Pity sits next to duty, and both are heavy. The line between romance and local memory blurs when it comes to river cities. In Crackle, they still tell how the wall dragon lived in a cave beneath the castle hill and took cattle from the pastures along the Vistula. Knights came and met defeat. A shoemaker's apprentice thought of another way. He stuffed a calf's skin with sulfur and pitch and left it at the cave's mouth. The dragon swallowed the bait. Thirst squeezed him like a fist. He ran to the river and drank until he burst. The people offered a prayer and wrote the common man's name in their books. If you stand on those stones today, you can look up at the castle and down at a bronze dragon that breathes fire for children on schedule. The old trick still warms the face. Songs of the French borderlands and English romances involve knights in the same work, though they robe it in the silk of courts. Sir Bevis of Hampton is exiled from home and grows into a man abroad. He returns with a sword named Morglay and kills a dragon near Southampton that was burning peasants in their fields. Guy of Warwick repents of his pride, goes on a pilgrimage, and returns thin as a staff. He fights a dragon near Northumberland, a giant and a strange cow the size of a barn. The poems are grand in their claims and generous in geography. They invariably do one useful thing: take a nobleman onto the road alone or with one friend, and make him answer for what his lands have suffered. A noble house is not a hedge against monsters. A noble house is the place from which a man leaves with a spear and a vow. In the East, Slavic songs acquire a sharper sound. In the Byliners of Rus, the bogatyr Dobrynya Nikitic is warned by his mother never to bathe in a certain river. and never to step on a certain stone. He does both a way of saying a young warrior must test the law. The three-headed dragon's Migorinich bursts forth. They fight for 3 days. The hero stands in boiling streams. He drives the creature to the Puke stone, where roads converge and worlds touch. He cuts off 3 heads, and then 3 more when the beast's wives fly out howling. In other tales, he liberates a princess from the dragon's claws and makes an entire city breathe again. The battles are long and dirty. They read like a winter that will not end until a man puts his whole body into fighting it. If you walk west again to the Welsh marches and look at the white horse on the hills, there is a bald patch on a small hill that the folk call Dragon Hill. They say the ground there is bare because the dragon's blood spilled and nothing will grow where it's soaked in. The outlines of the story are as old as chalk. A knight with a red cross on white fights a serpent with long claws and a hiss that carries over the ridge. An observer could see a line of people on the hill and a banner fluttering in the wind. Whether the tale names George or some other rider, memory anchors the shining blade to a real hill and secures the truth of the battle. A wound that saved a village can mark the land forever. Behind the spectacle and the sermon stands the craft. These stories often pause to tell you what the fighter wore and why. A knight puts on a thick gambeson under his mail, so a blow won't break his ribs immediately. He carries a shield covered in rawhide, so it won't splinter instantly. He takes a long ash spear with an iron tip, so the shaft won't shatter into slivers. When he braces it against the earth, if he has time, he digs a trench in the old way and lies in it point upwarder, man's only honest chance, against a weight with scales. If the dragon breathes flame in the tail, he soaks his cloak in water and throws it over his head as a hood for the moment of the strike. If it spits poison, he fights with the wind or with a kerchief soaked in wine, which at least gives him spirit. Pitch to go onto the spearheads, because fire rushes forward faster than a man can step. Lime dust blinds. Caltrops maim. Bells frighten. Dogs tell the sentry where the thing passes at night in the reeds. The hero in a romance may ride into the picture with a clean sword. The village that raised him knows he also carried a bag of tricks. The battle patterns repeat. A spring is defiled and must be cleansed. A narrow bridge becomes a funnel where a man can stand one against one. A blind alley is a trap. A cave mouth frames the heads, so a thrust has a chance to find a soft spot between the plates. There is a stubborn belief in the strike to the belly. From Sigurd under Fafnir to the archer, who finds the soft part under the wing in Beowulf's mound. The stories insist that even a wall of scales has a seam. The seam exists to reward patience and grit. Many dragons filling these tales are lovers of treasure, and the knights who slay them deserve more than the gratitude of the city. They stand in a cave where light rings like a struck bowl. Heaps of cups tilt against plaques and blades. Coins lie in drifts. There is silence there, except for that small sound gold makes when a foot steps upon it. It is a dangerous silence. The poems know this. They often force the hero to summon others to publicly carry away the wealth, or else they bury it again with the dead king and sing a warning. A horde sleeping in the darkness will awaken a worm. A horde passing through open hands to pay for bridges, walls, and bread will not. The dragon teaches thrift and duty as harshly as any priest. The dragon also fosters a courage that is not royal. Many victors are not princes. The shoemaker kills with a trick involving sulfur. The farmer ties knives to his cloak and enters the river, knowing the water will carry the blow for him. The border rider figures out that fire driven into the moor is better than a clean strike to the neck. The ballads preserve their names and the names of their villages. They praise the man who showed up with the tool fit for the job. Old customs sometimes anchor praise in law. When a new bishop of Durham crossed the Tees, the locals presented him with the falchion with which the Sockburn worm was said to have been slain, and he returned gratitude and confirmed liberties. The form of the ceremony said that a commoner's sword and a prelate's seal equally restrained dragons of different kinds. Art kept pace with the stories and taught the eye where to look for truth. Carvers placed dragons at the feet of tombstones, so that a dead knight always stood with a monster under his heel. Painters on church walls gave the worldly victor the same calm face a saint wears. When overthrowing a beast, heralds placed dragons on shields not only as figures to terrify enemies, but as a reminder that a family once held the line for a river town in a bad year. A creature crouching on a ledge and spewing rain could be read as a demon held in place. A creature on a shield could be read as a promise that someone in this house will not flinch when the bell tolls at noon. For all their glitter of steel and bravado, these stories still borrow from the old ways. The knight who succeeds often does so with outside help. A wife brings a torch at the right moment and sears the neck. A smith sets a rivet that will not shear. A wise woman tells a boy to stand in the current so the river serves as an ally. The battle is communal. The victory is shared. The worst defeats in the tales happen when a proud man rides out alone. Because he wants glory without counsel, the dragon gives him a quiet field and then takes everything. By the end of the Middle Ages, the dragon of the night became a kind of mirror. He shows greed when he lies on gold. He shows hunger when he comes out at night and burns a farm to light up the sky. He shows fear when a banner rises over a troop of men who would rather be in their fields, but still stand in an alley with ash spears. He also shows wit and toil. The right blade, the right bait, the right ground, the right friends. In this sense, the old battles taught the same lesson to both lords and ploughmen. You meet what threatens your home with what you have and with those you trust, and you do not expect the world to provide you with a fair fight. These are the very tales that gave later writers their language. A mound under the turf, a voice from a scaled throat promising death, the single soft spot under the wing, a shining hoard and a smell of smoke, a good sword with a name, the fool in the crowd who thinks trickery is not courage. From here, the dragon leaves the village and enters the bookshop. He learns to speak at length. He acquires irony. He becomes an actor as much as an adversary. And yet you can still hear the river on his scales, and see the soot on the rafters of the farm he burned. The knight from the ballads stands behind the modern novel and points his spear at the same old scene. You can feel the ground shifting underfoot in the 19th century. Old songs leave the hearth and settle into books with cloth covers and gilded titles. Scholars collect myths and print them in thick volumes so families can read them by lamplight. Nursery shelves fill with tales carrying traces of mounds and saints' lives. But now the monsters live inside engraved frames. It is here that the dragon returns to the center of the page, not as a rumor from a neighboring valley, but as a figure writers can construct with care, memory, and new ambition. Antiquarians and collectors were the first. The brothers Grimm printed their children's and household tales, and with them, a whole menagerie of serpents and monsters that had survived in kitchens and fields, long after the old gods were gone. Andrew Lang's colored fairy books gathered wonders from many lands and placed dragons and worms alongside princes who were once fools and ploughmen who were once brave. The taste for the medieval grew. Artists like Gustave Doré and Arthur Rackham drew ink coils and claws that looked like shadows from a campfire. Poets and novelists reached back to sagas and songs. William Morris wrote novels that felt like a long walk through an ancient hall. Painters placed knights under towers that had never seen gunpowder. Wagner brought a dark golden hoard and a dragon named Fafnir sleeping on it to the stage. In this music, the serpent is more than a beast. It is the sound of greed that reaches and reaches until it swallows the voice singing of it. Then an Oxford scholar put the key in the lock. J.R.R. Tolkien spent his life reading old languages and old songs. He stood before a lecture hall and said that the poem of Beowulf should be read for its monsters, as much as for its heroes. The dragon in that poem was not a flaw. It was the hinge on which everything turned. He came home and sat a dragon on a pile of treasure. He gave him a name, a voice, and a passion for conversation. In The Hobbit, appearing in 1937, Smaug awakens like a dampened fire and fills the mountain with his breath. He is vain and cunning. He plays with the thief who slipped under his cover. He sniffs out the smell of a dwarf, a pony, and a coin. He counts without moving. He speaks so that the air acquires the taste of metal. Tolkien gave him a vulnerable spot, where a scale was missing. He also gave him something rare, a mind that considers itself the only clear mind in the story. The meeting of the little burglar and the great beast is the enchantment of conversation, pulling the whole history of northern dragons into one chamber. You hear Fafnir in it, hear the dragon from the mound, and hear the hiss of fire that no man can extinguish once it breaks loose in a city. Tolkien did not bring many dragons onto the roads of the Lord of the Rings, but he seasoned the map with their traces. He wrote of ice dragons once coming from the far north, of a dragon named Scatha, killed by a prince of the Ithriad long before the events of the book, of the long death of an empire of metallurgists that loved heat and shadow. Dragons here are history, rather than present danger. It is a way of saying that fire and pride do not die in a single era. For a generation of readers, this was enough. One smog could fill 1,000 winter nights. Other writers took this creature and tried out new forms. C.S. Lewis turned a spoiled boy named Eustace into a dragon on an island of hot springs and quiet silence. The boy wakes up in a body reflecting his greed and loneliness. He learns pain and learns pity, and he is peeled back to a boy by an act of mercy that leaves a scar like truth. Kenneth Grahame had by then already written The Reluctant Dragon, a narrative of a dragon who would rather quote poetry than fight, and of a knight who would rather keep the peace than conquer a crowd. These books taught children that a dragon can be a friend as much as an enemy, and that sometimes a fight in a square is just a performance allowing a city to keep its stories and its peace at the same time. Ursula K. Le Guin came from the other shore. In Earthseer, dragons speak the true language of the world. They do not trade in coins. They trade in names. They are ancient in a way that makes humans look like sparks in the wind. They are not pets and not mounts. They do not love us. They acknowledge kinship, which is harder, colder, and more honest. When a wizard learns the name of the wind and the wave, he begins to understand why a dragon needs no walls or kings. In these books, the dragon is meaning as much as muscle. It is the memory of a world before maps, when names had weight, and McCaffrey crossed a border few had crossed before her and found the dragon a new home. In the Dragon Riders of Pern, the beasts are not monsters from an old poem. They are living partners, created by human skill to fight a rain of deadly thread falling from the sky. A woman touches a newborn dragonet, and the resulting bond proves closer than love and fiercer than fear. The riders sear the air to destroy what would devour fields and forests. Those dragons speak mind to mind. They carry their riders through space and a strange fold in time. These books are science fiction, but they are also ballads of toil, care, and endurance. They make the dragon a creature living within the human community and giving more than it takes. Later writers filled the shelves with other lives of the old beast. Terry Pratchett found a place in Discworld for swamp dragons nervous and combustible, and for a king of dragons raised by a well-read girl, helping him remember that power without duty is just an appetite with a crown. Robin Hobb sent sailors up a river of memory to a sea where semi-formed dragons struggled for the right to be born. In these books, the creatures have history in their bones. They suffer from the actions of the humans who use them, and demand a terrible justice when they become strong again. Naomi Novik took Britain's war against Napoleon and asked, what would it be like if dragons flew in formation over Trafalgar? A captain accidentally wins a dragon egg, gives up the life he thought he understood, and learns to be a friend to a mind that will never grow old. Christopher Paolini let a farm boy find a stone that turned out to be an egg, and used the oldest heat in history, the bond between a human life and a growing creature that needs it. Patricia Reed taught a princess to bring a cup of tea into a cave and talk to a dragon like a neighbor, which is as brave as any blade strike. Young readers grew up on these books and brought dragons into school classrooms, coffee shops, and late-night arguments. Some wrote them as enemies again, because a story still needs fear. Others wrote them as nations, as gods in exile, as survivors, as lawyers, as mothers who would burn a city if a child were in danger. The best of these tales do not forget to make the dragon a person. not a prop. A hoard is not an abstract vice. It is a choice to hold what others need. Fire is not a trick. It is a visible hunger. A flight over a mountain range is not a line on a map. It is a way to see the world that the people below cannot. When a writer holds fast to these truths, the dragon breathes, and the page becomes warm. Illustrators have done no less work than writers to anchor the look of the modern dragon. Pauline Baines drew Smog as a jewel that had learned to move. Alan Lee and John Howe drew scales that seemed to remember damp stone and ash. Michael Whelan lit McCaffrey's dragons in skies where you could feel a real wind. On the margins of these books and on their covers, a new canon of forms took root. 4 legs and wings for one tradition. A long serpentine body without wings for another. Eyes that are too clear. Teeth that are tools, not decoration. Claws that can lift a cup as deftly as tear a shield. Smoke that pours from the moor before the fire appears. A tail that is not a rope, but a limb making decisions. The revival imprint also taught readers how dragons think. Smog speaks with a voice that loves devious promises. Fafnir mumbles deep and slow, and he seems tired of life. The dragons of Earthsea speak in a language that would turn a human throat into flame. McCaffrey's dragons speak with a kindness that can instantly become steel when a rider is in danger. Pratchett's dragon speaks like a king who read the wrong books and believed they were written only for him. Hobbes' dragons begin as a choir of half-memories and wake to a rage that is never blind. Each voice tells you what the creature means in that world. If it speaks like a miser, it will lie on coins. If it speaks like a storm, it won't care who is wet and who is dry. If it speaks like a friend, it will still remain a friend with claws. Because truth keeps its form even when it loves you. Why did this happen in the modern era, and not in deep antiquity? Part of the answer is that the printing press gave monsters the same long life it gave to saints and emperors. A boy or girl in a city far from heaths and fjords could open a book and enter a cave. When the school day ended. The other part is that the modern world made people long for things that seemed older than factories. A dragon is a reminder that wealth is not just coins, that power is something more than a machine, that courage can be a small figure entering a dark place with a ready word, and a steady hand on a blade. In a century of wars, wires, and screens, the old form gave writers a way to speak of greed that kills from afar, of courage that looks like care rather than noise, of promises between minds that hold when the weather turns foul. Here, a meeting of worlds also occurs. Translators and travelers brought East Asian tales into English, French, and many other languages. The dragon kings of Chinese rivers and the serpents sheltering the Buddha began to appear alongside Western worms in anthologies and picture books. Some writers treated this with care. They wrote of dragons of rain and rivers that would be offended by a horde. They sat a ruler on a dragon throne and asked what that debt meant. Others freely mixed forms and created something new, showing where we live now. In a world where symbols cross oceans as fast as ships once crossed bays. The best of these intersections feel like a bow, not a theft. They allow the reader to learn that a dragon can be a neighbor, not an enemy, and that water can be a sanctuary, not a threat. As the shells grew heavy, a certain model took root in the backbone of the modern dragon tale. The writer chooses one of several paths. The dragon as adversary, which requires knack and grit. The dragon as ally, which requires trust and sacrifice. The dragon as mind, which requires the ability to listen. The dragon as mirror, which requires that harsh look a person casts at the part of themselves that wants and wants. Good stories often weave several of these paths together. A dragon can be a friend and still remain a test. A dragon can be a mind and still remain a maw that burns. Thus the old beast left the mound and entered the bookshop, not tamed, not diminished, but translated into a language millions can share. It learned to speak on the page. It learned to think along with us. It learned to live long enough to pass from one reader to another and change a little each time. This is what literature does with things that matter. It holds them to the light and gives them a new job. Before the dragon flew across the movie screen, it strode among painted sets and footlight smoke. 19th century showmen loved a good monster. Fairground panoramas unfolded battles between knights and scaled beasts, while a hidden organ let out a roar. Toy theaters sold cutout dragons on heavy paper, so a child could stage a final stand. On the kitchen table, when cinema appeared, the appetite was already ready. The question was how to make a creature of smoke and legend look as if it had weight. Animation and light tricks were tried first. In early fantasy shorts, a painted serpent could rise from a tank and vanish through an edit. Craft grew as model makers learned patience. Mid-century adventure films turned to stop motion and created dragons that could hold the gaze. Ray Harryhausen made a chain dragon clash with a cyclops and gave Jason a multi-headed hydra, whose necks writhed one after another. The secret was not just the movement, it was the sense that the light from the set fell on a body that was actually there. Scales caught it, eyes glinted. A tale told through shadow made the boy in the third row curl his toes in his boots. A single film in the early 80s made many viewers believe. Dragon's Lair showed the world Vermithrax a name that sounded like iron grinding on stone. The creature crawled and leaped with a brutal grace. Its wings creaked like old leather. Its lair felt damp and lived in. Fire erupted in a shroud that seemed to weigh as much as water. For the first time, the countryside around the beast looked like a place where food is grown and cows are kept. There was mud on the boots and fear in the voices. People left the theaters arguing about what they had seen, then went back to watch again. Since then, this dragon has not left the craft. Artists still measure a new design against that long head and that ragged wing. Animation gave a different kind of promise. When Maleficent became a dragon at the end of Sleeping Beauty, it seemed as if a cliff had grown a spine and stood tall. The beast on the screen felt like rage-given flesh. Years later, a boy met a dragon named Elliot, who was kind-hearted, green, and wanted a home. A story of kindness placed the creature at the center of a logging town, and taught a lesson without preaching. Then a white-furred luck dragon soared into the clouds in the never-ending story, and carried a sad child out of despair. That long body was not made to frighten. It was made to say, help comes when you call correctly. The 90s found a new path, giving the dragon a voice that sounded like a man of experience. The film Dragonheart asked the audience to befriend a creature that would rather joke than war, but was bound by an ancient vow. The more moved in a rhythm matching the words, and suddenly a dragon could speak to a knight as an equal. Not every tale of that decade chose softness. One took a ruined London and turned the sky into hunting grounds where dragons nested in towers and made fire their harvest. That vision thrust the beast into the modern world and asked how steel and grit could answer it. Fantasy epics brought dragons back to massive caverns. Filmmakers gave Smaug a voice with the taste of metal and a slow riff that felt like a flame taking hold of a dry rafter. The conversation between the little thief and the guardian of the vast treasury borrowed tension from the older stories and combined it with new mastery. Fire lit the coins. Smoke glided over the gold like a living thing. The audience leaned forward at that quiet moment when a single scale betrayed a flaw. And those same years, another saga sent 3 young dragons over cities and winter fields and turned them into weapons of state. They began as small creatures that fit in a chest and grew into forces that crushed armies. The show did not hide the price of this power. When a dragon burned a field, you saw the ash and counted the lost bushels. On another path, animation found joy in flight and in trust. A village at war with monsters learned that a dragon is not an enemy by nature. A boy reached out a trembling hand to a tired head. He listened. He learned how the wind flows down a fin, and how a rider must move with a body. He cannot master by force. The film's music made it seem like the air was lifting the seats. The actions that followed were acts of care. Harnesses were made and remade. Saddles were tested. Friends were made. The point was not winning one battle. It was creating a life where humans and dragons fit together, and both became better for the connection. Far from those northern cliffs, a river spirit took the form of a dragon in a bathhouse where nothing was what it seemed. The body was long and flexible. The face was kind and watchful at the same time. He moved through the air as if the air were water. This form came from another tradition that links dragons to rivers, rain, and the memory of a place. In that story, a child learns the dragon's true name and thereby frees him, allowing him to be who he was. In that tale, there is no treasure, no knight with a spear. There is only the hard work of memory and the quiet work of knowing how to let go. Television took a long time to prepare for dragons. In the 80s, a group of children met a multi-headed queen of evil in a cartoon that borrowed its rules from tabletop dice. For many viewers, it was the first time a dragon had more than one face. Years later, a new series asked a different question. What happens when dragons are not a rumor, but a fact that anyone can see from the city wall? The answer required a small army of artists and long patience. The beasts grew from puppets and sketches into presences that bent the grass and kicked up dust. They cast shadows that made soldiers squint. They didn't just fly in to burn. They slept in courtyards. They strained at chains. They crunched bones when they ate. The series taught the audience to recognize the difference between a hungry dragon and an angry dragon. Games took dragons and made them a test that a player could survive only by learning. At the table, the first set of role-playing rules made dragons a measure of a party's grit. One queen with 5 fierce heads guarded her brood. One ancient king of the heavens ruled a calm, lawful domain. These names migrated from rulebooks to novels, and from novels back to game nights. On screens, an open world allowed a wanderer to shout words of power and tear a dragon from the clouds. The battle was part duel, part hunt. You listened for the roar behind the ridge. You watched for the bank that signaled a dive. You counted breaths. You learned when to stand and when to run for the cover of a ruined tower. Other worlds made dragons the final guardians of secret dungeons. Some made them gods in the guise of beasts. Some allowed the player to raise one from an egg and lead it through a wall. In each case, the lesson was the same lesson as on the old fields by the mound. First knowledge, then courage. Luck if it comes. Card tables and living room floors filled with dragons of another sort. A red-winged icon held pride of place on a collector's card. A wise ancient dragon learned to plan centuries ahead and destroy worlds with a thought. Children traded a white-eyed dragon with a name that seemed to scream. A boy in another show collected 7 shining spheres and summoned a serpent of the heavens, who granted wishes. The creatures on these cards and screens were not only enemies, they were goals. They were riddles. They were prizes that turned an ordinary afternoon into a story a child could retell all week. Music and sports borrowed the form. A red dragon on a green and white field fluttered from castle walls and rugby pitches, keeping a nation's memory awake. A club rode out with a dragon on their jerseys and filled a stadium with the sound of drums and hope. A university told its students to be dragons and learn to breathe honest fire in their work. In these cases, the old fear fades and pride remains. The creature symbolizes the resilience and nerves that hold in the final minutes of a tense match. Theme parks and parades carried dragons through crowds, as if the festival were a living book. A wire frame and silk body twisted over heads, while drums counted the steps. In another park, a dragon sat on a ledge and breathed fire on schedule. A harmless thrill that still made small children step back and then laugh when the heat touched their faces. Merchants understood what they saw in those faces. Toy shelves filled with plastic and plush. Modelers sat at kitchen tables and carved tiny scales with knives under magnifying glasses. Artists learned to draw a convincing eye that looked alive from 3 feet away. Nature programs added a modern touch. A massive lizard in Indonesia kept the old name and reminded viewers that a mouth full of bacteria and a heavy tail are enough to become a dragon for a person who gets too close. A television special staged an imaginary excavation and asked the question, what would dragon bones look like if they were ever found? Scientists joined the game and explained why wings need to grow exactly like that, and fire does not. The show gave ordinary people the chance to hold both the dream and the doubt without spoiling either. Technology changed the grammar of dragons on the screen. Mechanical models could move forward and beat wings. Computer graphics could make a body billow from nose to tail. The best works often blend both. Flame begins as a torch beneath the camera and becomes a moving shroud that lights the hall and sears the shield. Ash sticks to the cheek because a makeup artist sat in a chair at dawn and made it a reality. A rider leans into a saddle mounted on a rig that bucks like a storm, while a blank wall replaces the sky that will be painted in later. The difference between a good dragon and an unmemorable one is not just in the money. It is respect for how the light falls and how the weight shifts. It is the memory that a dragon is a character with habits and a past, not just a noise burning down a barn. Through all these forms, the same old themes survive. Greed attracts trouble. Power without duty costs more than a city can pay. Trust turns fear into strength. Names have weight. The guardian at the spring is as old as the village and as new as a screensaver. When a dragon descends, the story must decide. Is this creature a storm to be endured, a neighbor to be understood, or a mirror held up to a person who took more than they need? Good stories do not rush this choice. They allow the dragon to be terrible and noble in turn. They let or do its work. So, the dragon now lives in cinemas, on couches, at game nights, in schoolyards, and on sports jerseys. It is a sound signal, a team name, and a blue glow on a phone. It is also still that shape you see when a pile of clouds over a hot field looks like a spine and a head, and your heart beats faster for a reason you cannot say out loud. The creature belongs to us as much as it ever did. It goes with us into a century of new tools and old needs and continues to ask the same questions, with smoke on its breath. If you gather every dragon you have met on these pages and place them side by side, the first thing you will notice is that each wears the look of its homeland. Where rivers rule the year, the dragon is long-bodied and flexible, and he rides the cloud and rain as if they were his own thoughts. Where winters are harsh and mounds dot the hills, the dragon lies heavy on treasure and on memory. In places where kings must prove that heaven allows them to rule, the dragon rises on banners and robes. The creature is a mirror of the labor that people must perform to live. It teaches through fear and favor. It tells you what a community holds sacred and what it holds dangerous. In China, the dragon speaks of water, order, and correct rule. He twists in the cloud and dives into rivers. He carries a pearl that artists leave just out of reach, a shining knot of wisdom or thunder claimed by kings when they stand where they are supposed to. The five-clawed dragon on an emperor's robe is not just decoration. It is a promise that rain will come in season and that canals and granaries will be maintained with care. 9 dragons carved on palace walls look out from a sea of glazed waves, so that courtiers do not forget who holds the balance. On the streets, dragons live as boats and dances. The drumbeat becomes thunder, a silk body rides the air, and the city asks the earth to be kind. Even the language of the stars places a dragon in the east to guard the spring. In this world, the dragon is usually not an enemy. He is a patron. He gives the farmer hope and the official a measure. He also serves as a warning to the ruler, as a great flood or a bitter drought can be read as the dragon turning his head away. Throughout India and Southeast Asia, snake kings show how water and life are intertwined. A naga with a fan of many hoods guards a staircase and a spring. A temple bridge in Angkor lies between living stone bodies that curve like river snakes, and a king declares his duty by linking his city to this power. A village in Bengal honors Manasa for guarding against snake bites and sending the right rains at the right time. A statue of Mukalinda spreads its hoods over a meditating Buddha and says that wisdom needs shelter when storms gather. In Laos and Thailand, river towns maintain shrines to serpents where currents bend and the water looks watchful. Boat races foam the brown surface while bells ring and prayers are offered for good harvests. Everywhere the lesson is the same. Speak to the river with respect. Keep the banks in order and make your offerings. If you insult the powers beneath the water or neglect the dams, the serpent will show you how quickly luck can turn away. Korea and Japan add their threads to this tapestry. An imugai can endure long years and ascend as a true dragon when it takes possession of a pearl fallen from the sky. This story tells a boy by a pond that patience and dignity can lift a creature higher than what is given by birthright. A Japanese dragon stands at a temple basin and pours clean water from a bronze maw. He prevents the ritual of washing hands and mouth before prayer from turning into empty habit. He reminds the visitor that water is a gift and names have weight, as dragons on these islands are also the form taken by sea gods who have their own treasures and their own rules. When a child learns the name of a river and speaks it with reverence, the river becomes a neighbor, not just a line on a map. In the West, the dragon means something else because the landscape demands different qualities from a person living there. In the Greek language, the word dragon comes from a root associated with a fixed stare and wakefulness. Therefore, the creature coils at a spring or a grove and does not sleep. It guards a fleece shining in the darkness and a tree full of golden apples. It watches for those who want to take what does not belong to them or build a new order where the old one still holds. The hero who kills or lulls it to sleep must prove not only courage, but rightness. The battle marks a change that everyone will have to live with. Delphi belongs to Apollo only after Python dies at the sacred spring. Thebes rises only after Cadmus pays for the serpent he killed, and only after the teeth he sowed grow into men who will build walls. The dragon is the price of a new city. In the north, the creature acquires new habits. It lies on gold because people bury riches in mounds and leave them in graves, and because winter makes food and coins seem like different forms of the same thing. A dragon that loves treasure is a warning about greed that warms in the darkness and wakes to burn farms when a single cup goes missing. Fafnir is a man who loved gold until he became the very creature that loves it most. Beowulf's dragon is the final test of a king who paid all debts and will pay one more. Nidhogg gnaws the root to remind you every good thing has something undermining its foundation, and that negligence is a kind of invitation to decay. Jolmungan sleeps in the sea, biting his tail, and makes honest people feel small when they lift their eyes to the horizon. All of them are not only monsters, they are ways of speaking about winter, about wealth, about patience in the face of trouble, and about the price of a people's safety. In the era of the church, the dragon puts on moral robes because villagers want stories that speak directly of sin and hope. A scaled belly becomes a book that can be read in the marketplace. Pride and greed coil in the darkness, exhaling a breath that smells of plague. A saint arrives with a prayer and an established order of words spoken for 1,000 mornings, and the well gives clean water again. Sometimes the dragon bows its head before the stall and follows a woman singing a song. Sometimes it dies under a lance after the city promises to change its ways. Gargoyles on high roofs divert the rain from saints carved in stone. The ancient serpent, once defiling the water, is now set to keep the walls dry. The message is practical and good. Set the world in order. Honor what feeds you, and do not take more than your share when your neighbor's child is hungry. There are places where the serpent is not at all a beast to be feared, but a teacher and a giver. Among the Maya and Mexico, the feathered serpent represents the wind, knowledge, and the burden of power. A god with a serpentine body and a crest of Quetzal feathers walks between heaven and earth, bringing laws for cities and calendars that keep the fields in step with the sun. On the day of the equinox, the shadow from the stairs falls on the face of the pyramid as if a serpent made of light is descending to meet the people. This is not a dragon guarding a horde. This is a lord who gives order and demands a price in return. Knowledge in these stories is a gift with sharp edges, and the one who carries it must accept limitations or be punished by the forces that gave it. Heraldry and emblems keep ancient meanings alive, even when people forget old rites. A red dragon soars from the flag of a small country, remembering a long struggle for its name. A thunder dragon glares fiercely from the flag of a mountain kingdom, telling every traveler that storms and conscience are part of its life. A city links its pride to a dragon on a bridge, and the knight on its seal tramples a serpent with his horse, a beast that could just as easily be an adder from a nearby field or a demon. The Roman standard, with its fabric body and metal head, becomes a rallying point that sounds like wind rushing through a living throat. The creature's appearance is a way of saying that a people are vigilant, that they cannot be easily moved, and that they claim the right to stand where they stand. Old scientific books include the serpent in their diagrams, a circle of a snake biting its tail. The Ouroboros appears in manuals teaching students about matter, spirit, and the cycle of change. A note nearby says the same thing. The sea serpent says, only in a scribe's hand. Everything feeds what follows it. Ends feed beginnings. A prudent person watches the scene where one becomes the other. The dragon encircling the world in a poem does the same work in a brighter light. Through these meanings, several harsh truths repeat until they begin to seem like laws. First, water is life, and power over water is power over life. When the dragon rules the cloud and the river, people must learn reverence, and the ruler must learn how to earn that rope. Second, wealth kept in the dark will bring ruin. When the dragon lies on a hoard, a boy with a shovel will soon be lying in a trench with a sword, and the village will burn regardless. Third, boundaries matter. Springs, doorways, bridges, and the edges of fields belong to no one and belong to all. A guardian in such places is a friend if you keep promises and an enemy if you break them. Fourth, courage is simultaneously a personal act and a public trust. The saint with a leash, the knight with a spear, the shoemaker with a sulphur trick, the farmer with knives on his cloak, the official who fasts and prays for rain, the mother bringing a torch at the right moment. Each face is a dragon, so that others may drink, sow, sleep, and wake for work. The final truth is that dragons are not simple symbols. They can bless and they can destroy. They can mean pride and they can mean legitimate rule. They can burn a barn and they can pull clean water from a stone mouth in the rain. That is why they survive. A culture can place its fears and its hopes on the same scale back and be understood. A story can move from a field to a palace and from a shrine to a school without losing the thread, because the creature at its heart is large enough to carry many meanings without breaking. Put all this together, and you see why every age finds its own dragon. A village living by a river sees a long body in a cloud and calls for rain with drums. A court claiming the favor of heaven places dragons on ropes and is judged when floods come, and granaries are empty. A hall keeping too much gold learns what form guilt can take when it sleeps in a mound. A church serving the poor finds a way to make the beast divert rain from the walls. A nation needing courage for a hard battle or a hard winter gives itself a dragon, and holds the line under its gaze. Through it all, the creature remains what it always was, the face of a power that can help or harm. A test of the heart holding the spear. A story that teaches labor and vigilance in the language of fire, water, and scales. If you want to know why dragons keep returning, go first to an apothecary of old China and look at the labeled vessels. 4 centuries. Apothecaries ground lungu, meaning dragon bones, into powders for fevers and fractures. The bones did not belong to dragons. They were the fossilized remains of great creatures that fell asleep in stone, long before humans built cities. But no one knew this. Farmers dug a jaw out of a riverbank and brought it to the market. A merchant placed a coin in a callous palm and wrote a neat label. Dragon. History acquired physical weight. People carried it home in paper packets. There is power in a myth you can hold in your hands, all over the world. Other people found strange things in the earth and made sense of them with that same ready word. A shepherd on an island beach lifted a slab and saw a rib cage resembling the hull of a boat. Fishermen found black teeth in the shape of spearheads and called them petrified tongues. A farmer pulled a horn core as long as an arm from a damp English field, and the village said giant or dragon without feeling the need to choose. In the porches of churches in seaside towns, they hung the jaws of whales, and everyone called them sea monsters and felt calmer under their shadow. When a thing of such size ends up at your fence, the mind reaches for the oldest vessel strong enough to hold it. Dragon is a sturdy word. It does not leak. Living beasts also exist that keep the legend alive. A Nile crocodile, dragged upstream by a flood into quiet waters. appears as a dragon to any eye that hasn't learned its scientific name. And some indeed swam into the ancient Mediterranean and gave people in cloaks a very bad morning. A surfacing whale raises a long back above the sea and disappears again without a sound, and that sight stays in a sailor's throat for the rest of his life. An oarfish streaks beneath a wave like a silver banner, and the mind says sea serpent before it can say anything else. On the shining islands south of Java, a massive lizard stares with a fixed gaze, steps forward without haste, and brings down a goat, mouth in blood, tail swinging like a club. The hide looks forged. The people there didn't need a book to give this creature a suitable name. They had already invented the truest one. The sky and stone add their share. A flaming stone falls at night and leaves a dent in a field. Years later, elders will point to this scar when a comet, bright as a sword stroke, streaks across the sky, and say this place must be watched. Belemnite's fossilized mollusk shaped like small spears are found in plowed furrows, and villagers call them thunderbolts and hide them under the rafters for luck. A volcano exhales fire into a dark cloud, and ash falls like sifted flour. A lake suddenly belches a foul breath because a gas pocket found a crack in the rock. Imagine explaining this before the right words existed. You would reach for your oldest story and make it a banner. Ancient human senses help the story. People see faces in clouds and figures in the texture of wood without wanting to. A ridge of storm clouds on a hot day looks like a neck and a jaw, and for a moment, you expect it to turn its head and look back. The mouth of a cave looks like a throat. A bend in a river hisses where the current goes under a root, and your mind says something is breathing there. For this, neither priest nor poet is needed. That's how the brain keeps you alive. We notice movement on the edge of vision. We fill in the missing parts with the most dangerous shape that fits. We prefer to err on the side of running away. Anthropologists have gone further and asked whether the dragon is a bundle woven from very ancient feospheres that allowed our ancestors to live long enough to become our ancestors. We quickly notice the coil of a snake against fallen leaves. We don't need to be taught to watch for the eyes of a large cat. We look up when the shadow of a bird of prey passes. Put all three together in the dim light of a cave or the harsh light of the savannah, and you get a creature the size of all your troubles, which can strike from the ground, the grass, or the sky. Give it a hard hide, because teeth bounce off panic unless panic is given a vulnerable spot. Give it a breath that burns, because fire is the oldest fear we never learned to turn our backs on. The dragon is an animal that does not exist, but which matches how we lived for a very long time. Old books of wonders added more threads to this knot. Medieval lapidaries wrote of draconite stones cut from the heads of living dragons that could cure what no physician could. Try to imagine the scene taught there. A lord stands with a drawn knife beside a sleeping beast, while three men hold a bag under the jaw, as a priest whispers a prayer that the dragon's last breath blesses the stone rather than curses it. It is a legend of audacity, and the value of that for which peril has been paid. Good myths serve as parables of trade and courage. Natural errors become evidence and remain so long after the correct answer appears. A giant shark's tooth lies on a bishop's table. He calls it a dragon's tongue and applies it to the throat of a man he believes poisoned. The patient recovers, and the tooth ends up in reliquaries after the bishop's death. A crocodile's skin is nailed to a church beam after a crusader returned home with a story. Children grow up beneath it. They inherit the fear and the relief. When a fisherman loses a boat in the fog and two bodies wash ashore, the priest points to the hide and says that ancient powers have not left the world, and that fear still has a face. There is also a practical side. The dragon is a useful villain. It is large enough to make a city act together. It is not an army and not a neighbor. Therefore, a story can punish it without starting a feud that will outlive the storyteller. It holds the spring the village needs, or the road the caravan must pass. This is better than a monster that prowls from cottage to cottage, making the town hunch its shoulders at dusk and lock its doors. The dragon sits and waits. It sets a deadline. It demands coin or cattle. It demands a regular order of gifts. It is a thing that can be faced head-on. This is the type of enemy a good story loves, because the hero can make a plan, and the crowd can stand and see the plan work. The dragon is also the perfect test. It has a hide from which blades bounce, and a breath that incinerates courage. Victory requires a vulnerable spot that must be found by one who listens, or who watches longer than fear can endure, or who is humble enough to accept help. This is the sort of lesson a mother tells a child by the fire. Be brave, yes. But first be smart and be ready to carry water to the one holding the torch. Knights learn this lesson in songs. Villagers learn it by laying a muddy board across a ditch, so the hunter in the trench can stand just high enough to strike. The dragon story teaches leatherworking and theology simultaneously. Greed has always needed a body. When people learn to bury silver and place swords and cups in the mound of their dead king, something in the village wonders if the wealth under the earth will change. The dragon makes this worry simple. It says the horde sleeps like an animal and wakes like one, and that it will take life a generation later if the living do not keep the promises made to the dead. Later centuries keep the beast for another lesson. A banker in a shining hall holds onto too much, while the city starves at night. The mind reaches for a picture. It doesn't reach for a ledger, it reaches for a dragon with a dim eye that does not leave the coins it counts. A writer can hang this picture in the first chapter, and the reader will understand the scale of what follows without a single word about interest rates. Dragons also carry the pure truth that power is not good unless it is forced to be so. A ruler sitting on a dragon throne is already telling the country that this is a reign that will be judged by the rain and by the dikes kept in order. If the rivers rise at the wrong hour and the harvest perishes, people will say the dragon has turned away. In another land, a queen walks with 3 young dragons and learns that the heat in their breath is glory, and it is a price, and that mercy must walk alongside fire if the crown is to mean something more than ruin under a banner. The creature makes the weight of power visible. You can see it in the eyes and count it in acres of ash. Look at the places where dragons returned most strongly in the last century, and you will see the soil was ready. Industrial life gathered people into cities and replaced the rhythms of weather with the rhythms of factory whistles. A longing grew for old forms that spoke to the river, the stone, and the wind. Dragons returned through ink and paint and the sound of the brass section. The moment the curtain rises over a dark cave, at the same time, science offered a better story about the bones in the earth. A boy could look at a diagram of a sauropod on a school wall, and then open a book, showing a red-scaled thing on a hoard and feel a thrill from both. One is the truth of the earth, one is the truth of the heart. Together they keep the mind alive. There is also a childhood reason, which is not small. Children need an image to fear, and an image to love. They want to test themselves against a cliff, and a story is the safest cliff in existence. A dragon can be a friend if approached with care, a lesson that can be transferred to any living creature worthy of acquaintance. A dragon can be an enemy deserving its end, a thought appropriate on a day when the world seems full of teeth. A good tale will allow a child to meet both without being crushed. The beast becomes a schoolteacher who doesn't mark the slate with red chalk, but still gets the point across. There is also the simple wonder of flight and flame. People look up. We always have. Birds taught us envy. Dragons let us pretend. A dragon with wings makes the body imagine what it's like to rise from a cliff and leave the line of the river beneath your feet. A dragon with fire allows a heart feeling small and cold to imagine itself warm and formidable for the duration of a single scene. These are not bad desires. It is one way to practice being a human who will have to rise and who will have to learn when to be fierce and when to be gentle. On the edge of all these human reasons stands the quiet pull of the ancient world. Many say the serpent holds the earth, or binds it, or threatens it. The symbol is a hook for the thoughts that creation is not finished, and that the world must be kept. You can pray this into a ritual. You can work it into a canal. You can place it on a teen jersey. You can embody it in a film that lights up a cinema as bright as noon. The pull remains the same. We like to see the thing that scares us. holds us, and helps us. We like to imagine standing before it with something in our hands that will work. The strangest truth is that dragons are so clear they can be anything and still be themselves. They can be a river spirit under a temple roof. They can be an ancient king of mountains. They can be a saint's lesson in the square. They can be a voice in a cave sounding like a winter campfire. They can be a partner carrying a rider through the rain. They can be a banner over the gates or a toy over a cradle. The form holds. Meanings change like the weather over a mountain range. And the creature walks through it all, majestic as always, covered in the scales of memory and need. So dragons survive because the stone keeps secrets and gives them up one jaw at a time. They survive because fear keeps the watch, and imagination continues to give fear a face. They survive because communities need a common enemy and a common helper. And because one body can do both jobs. They survive because gold is still heavy. Because storms still come. Because rulers still need to be judged. Because children still ask for one more story when the fire in the fireplace has burned out. And someone needs to get up to close the door.